I was already dead when she walked into the room. That's not a figure of speech. The chief surgeon had called it. Time of death, 2:47 a.m. The monitors had gone flat. The team had stepped back, gloves stripped, the particular silence of people who had done everything, and it hadn't been enough settling over the room like sediment. The body of Ryan Kingston, crime lord, untouchable, feared by every man in Chicago who knew what his name meant, was being tagged for the morgue. And Madison Brooks put her fingers on his wrist and felt something. Not much. Barely anything. A flutter so faint it could have been her own pulse bleeding through her fingertips. But she'd spent 4 years in trauma nursing, and she knew the difference. And what she felt in that room at 2:48 a.m. was not nothing. What she did next would cost her everything she'd spent 6 years building, or save a man who, by every legal and medical standard in that room, was already gone. She didn't hesitate. That's the part she couldn't explain afterward. Not to herself, not to anyone. She just moved. If this story found you tonight, if you're watching from your living room, your kitchen, wherever you land after the day is done, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because what happens in the hours after Madison makes that choice will change everything. For her, for Ryan Kingston, and for every person who trusted the wrong man. Stay with me until the end. Part 1. The night had been ordinary right up until it wasn't. That was the thing about trauma nursing. The ordinary nights were the ones you couldn't trust, because the ordinary was always just a container for whatever was coming. Madison had learned that in her first year at St. Gabriel Medical Center, when a routine Tuesday had turned into a 4-car pileup and a 6-year-old who didn't make it, and she'd cried in the break room for 11 minutes and then gone back out because there was no other option. She'd learned it again a dozen times since. The night always had something in it you hadn't planned for. She was at the end of a 12-hour shift when the call came in. Not a call, exactly. More of a disturbance that moved through the department like a change in air pressure. Nurses looked up from charts. An orderly stopped mid-hallway. The automatic doors to the ER bay opened, and then the sound of engines followed, low and heavy. And through the intake window, Madison could see the headlights of not one, but 3 armored SUVs pulling into the ambulance lane, with the deliberate, controlled aggression of vehicles driven by people accustomed to being the most dangerous thing on any given road. She was already moving toward the bay when her charge nurse, Patricia, caught her arm. "Stay back," Patricia said. "Someone's coming in." "Someone is already in," Patricia said, and her voice had a quality Madison had not heard in it before. Not alarm exactly, but something adjacent to it. The sound of a person choosing their words carefully because the wrong ones could have consequences she hadn't fully mapped yet. The bay doors opened and they brought him in on a gurney at a speed that told Madison everything about how bad it was before she could see him. 2 paramedics running, one with his hands applying direct pressure to a wound in the left chest that had soaked through 3 layers of gauze and was still bleeding. Behind them, not hospital security, not police, 4 men in dark clothes moving with the coordinated economy of people trained for something other than medicine. Their eyes going to the corners of the room first before they went to the patient, which was its own kind of language. Ryan Kingston was 37 years old. Madison didn't know that yet. What she knew, arriving at the gurney, was that he was large, larger than she'd expected somehow, even unconscious, even nearly exsanguinated. There was a physical density to him that the trauma bed barely contained, and that he was the color of old wax, and that his blood pressure, when Dr. Hale called for it, was 70 over palp and dropping. "What happened?" Hale demanded. One of the dark-clothed men, the one closest to the gurney, the one who moved like he was personally responsible for what happened to this particular body, said, "He was shot, twice. Left chest, 1 possible abdominal." "By who?" The man's jaw moved slightly. "That's being handled." Hale looked at him for exactly 1 second with the expression of a surgeon who does not have time for this. "I need the room clear of non-medical." "That's not going to happen," the man said. Not aggressive, just stated, the way you state a fact about the weather. "Sir, my name is Cole Mercer. I am not leaving this room. Everyone else will give you space." He stepped back 2 feet and stood with his back against the wall and his arms at his sides and did not move again. The other 3 men positioned themselves outside the bay, and the door closed, and Hale made the calculation Madison would have made, that this man was going to stand against that wall regardless of what anyone said, and fighting it was going to cost time that the patient didn't have, and turned back to the gurney. 40-unit rapid infusion. Let's go. Someone get me a chest tray. Madison was already pulling the tray. The next 22 minutes were the specific organized chaos of a trauma resuscitation, controlled, loud in bursts, everyone moving on established rails of training and protocol. Madison had been in this exact state dozens of times. The body knew what to do even when the mind was still catching up. She pushed fluids, she called readings, she held pressure when Hale needed a third hand, and he had only two. The abdominal wound was a through and through, less catastrophic than it looked. The chest wound was the problem, left ventricle, the kind of damage that required a surgical theater and a team, and luck that came in quantities most people never got. Get me OR2, Hale said. Now, tell them we're coming up in 4 minutes. BP's not supporting transport, someone said. What's it at? 62 over palp. Push another unit. Hale's hands were inside the chest now, the crack of the emergency thoracotomy still sharp in the room, doing the manual cardiac compression that meant the heart had stopped generating its own rhythm, and someone's hands were doing the work for it. Come on, he said quietly, to no one in particular. Or maybe to the patient. Madison had heard surgeons do that, talk to the body like it could hear, like it made a difference. Sometimes she thought it did. It didn't this time. At 2:31 a.m., the rhythm on the monitor went flat and stayed flat. Hale worked for another 16 minutes. That was longer than protocol required, longer than statistics would justify, and Madison understood it not as optimism, but as the specific stubbornness of a surgeon who had not failed in front of witnesses in some time and was not ready to do it now. At 2:47 a.m., he stripped his gloves and said quietly the words that closed the room. Time of death, 2:47. The team stepped back. The monitors were silenced. Someone started the documentation. Someone else began the process of contacting the on-call administrator because a man had just died in their emergency department, and he was not an ordinary man, and there were going to be calls and questions, and a paper trail that needed to be exactly right. Cole Mercer, from his position against the wall, had not moved. He was looking at the body on the table. His face was doing something that Madison could not entirely name. Not grief exactly, not shock exactly, but the particular expression of a person who has prepared themselves for the possibility of a thing and is discovering, in the moment it arrives, that preparation does not do what you thought it would. Madison was charting at the bedside station. She should have been stepping back. The resuscitation was over. Her job was documentation, and then handoff, and then, mercifully, the end of a 12-hour shift that had already taken everything she had. She was reaching for the chart when she brushed Ryan Kingston's wrist. It was incidental, her hand moving across the gurney rail, catching the back of his wrist for less than a second. She almost didn't register it. She was thinking about the documentation format, about whether she'd charted the second unit of packed cells, or if Patricia had, about the fact that her feet had been hurting since hour 9, and she was aware of them again now that the adrenaline was thinning. Then she stopped. She stood very still and put 2 fingers back on his wrist at the radial pulse point, and she waited. Nothing. Then, not nothing. Something. A tremor. A whisper of movement, so faint it registered as much through her skin as through any clinical knowledge. She pressed slightly harder and waited again, counting in her head, and she felt it again. Irregular. Weak. The kind of signal that a monitor wouldn't catch because the monitor needed a threshold to register. And this was below that threshold. This was the territory south of what machines could see. She looked up. Hale was at the doorway talking to the administrator. The rest of the team had dispersed to other tasks. Cole Mercer was still against the wall, still looking at the man on the gurney, still doing that thing with his face. Madison looked at the closed door. She looked at the crash cart, which was already being restocked by the tech, because resuscitations ended and the equipment didn't wait around. She looked at Ryan Kingston, who was officially dead, who had been dead for 2 minutes, who had a heartbeat she could feel under her fingers that was so faint it barely deserved the name. She made the decision in the time it took to exhale. "Get that cart back here," she said, loud enough to stop the tech. "Now. And I need someone to get Dr. Hale." Cole Mercer came off the wall. "What?" "He has a pulse," Madison said. "It's weak and it's irregular and it is there. Someone get me Hale and someone get that card and I need the paddles charged to 160. Hale called it. I know what Hale called. He called it with incomplete information because the monitors can't read this low. She had the defibrillator paddles in her hands. She was aware that what she was doing was unauthorized, that a physician had called the time of death, that performing resuscitative measures on a patient who had been declared dead required an order that she did not have. She was aware of all of this with a clarity that existed slightly to the left of the immediate physical certainty of what she'd felt under her fingers. Someone get Hale in this room right now. The tech ran. Cole Mercer was at the bedside. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read, not the evaluative look of a man deciding whether to stop her, but something more raw than that. Are you sure? He said. No, Madison said, which was the truth. But I felt something. She positioned the paddles. Stand clear. She shocked him. The body moved with the current the way bodies do. A single galvanic jerk, impersonal and physical, nothing like what you see in films. The monitor stayed flat. She looked at the line, at the wrist, at the line again. There. A blip. Just one. Then two. Then a rhythm that was ragged and barely sustained but was, unmistakably, a rhythm. I've got something, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. I need Hale now. Hale came through the door 30 seconds later in the specific high-alert state of a physician being told that a patient he declared dead may not be. He went to the monitor. He went to the patient. He stood there for 5 seconds doing his own assessment, his own version of what Madison had done with 2 fingers and a held breath. Start a dopamine drip, he said finally. His voice was very flat. 5 micrograms per kilo per minute. Get me a repeat pressure. He looked at Madison. When did you feel it? 2 minutes after you called it. Maybe less. You shocked him without... I shocked him. She met his eyes. He had a pulse, Dr. Hale. I felt it. He held her gaze for a long moment. He was not a man who apologized, not in the middle of a resuscitation, not when the math was still happening. Get me a pressure, he said again, to the room, and turned back to the patient. The blood pressure came back at 58/40. Not compatible with sustained life, but better than 0. Better than flat. Ryan Kingston was not dead. Cole Mercer stepped back to the wall and Madison glanced at him and saw something happen in his face that she would think about later. A loosening, sudden and complete, like a man who had been holding a structure together from the inside and had just been told he could put it down for a moment. Not happiness. Something more complicated than happiness. The specific relief of a person who had not let themselves believe until the evidence was irrefutable. He took a breath, set his hand flat against the wall beside him, nodded once, at nothing, as if confirming something with himself. Madison looked back at Ryan Kingston. His color was still terrible. It was still in critical failure. There was a long, uncertain road between here and any version of survival, and it was full of things that could go wrong in ways she had seen and ways she hadn't. But the monitor was tracing a rhythm that had not been there 3 minutes ago, and his blood pressure, while dangerously low, was a number, and numbers could move. She had no idea, standing at that bedside, what she had just started. They took him to the surgical suite at 3:15 a.m., with Hale leading the team and a drip that was doing the bare minimum to keep his pressure from collapsing entirely. Madison handed off at the OR doors and stood in the corridor outside and let the adrenaline finish its transaction with her body. The shaking that came after, the legs that went slightly soft, the awareness of her own heart beating too fast for standing still. Patricia found her there. What happened in there? Patricia asked. She wasn't accusing, she was genuinely asking, the way a person asks when they've processed the sequence of events. And the sequence doesn't quite make sense, and they need someone who is inside it to fill the gaps. I felt his pulse, Madison said. After Hale called it. After Hale called it. Patricia was quiet for a moment. She was a careful woman, careful in the way that came from 30 years of nursing, which meant she understood that there were actions with paperwork consequences, and actions that lived in the space where paperwork didn't entirely reach. You documented everything? I'll document everything. Yes. You know Hale is going to have to make a note. I know. And risk management. Patricia. Madison looked at her. He was alive. I felt it. Whatever comes after, I wasn't going to do nothing. Patricia looked at her for a long moment with an expression that was not disapproval and not quite approval either, but something in the middle. The look of a senior nurse who has watched enough people make enough choices under pressure to know that the choices that matter are rarely the comfortable ones. Go wash up, she said finally. When he's out of surgery, you're going to have a lot of people wanting to talk to you. She was right, but not in the way either of them expected. Cole Mercer found Madison at 4:20 a.m. in the break room. She was on her third cup of coffee that she wasn't tasting and a granola bar that she'd opened and abandoned, and her shift had technically ended 40 minutes ago, and she had not moved toward the exit because she couldn't. Not yet. The OR was still running. She'd asked Patricia to text her when it was done. Cole Mercer did not knock. He came through the break room door the way he came through every room, with the awareness of someone tracking the exits while he tracked the room's occupants. And he sat across from her in the chair that had a crack in the upholstery and the loose leg, the chair everyone who worked nights avoided, and he put his forearms on the table and looked at her. How did you know? He said. I told you, I heard what you told us. I'm asking how you knew to check. Everyone else had already moved on. He said it without judgment. Most people would have. Madison looked at her coffee. I don't know, she said. My hand was near his wrist and I felt something, or I thought I did. I wasn't sure enough to be sure. She paused. But I wasn't unsure enough to let it go. Cole was quiet for a moment. He had the quality of a person who measured silences before filling them. He's important to a lot of people, he said finally. I can see that. What you did tonight, the risk you took, that won't go unnoticed. She looked at him. I didn't do it to be noticed. I did it because it was the right thing. He held her gaze. Whatever he found in it, it seemed to satisfy some internal question he was running. My name is Cole Mercer, he said. I'm the person you'd talk to if you needed something. If anything about tonight becomes difficult for you, with administration, with the documentation, you call me. He set a card on the table. Plain, just a phone number. No name, no title. I'm a nurse, Madison said. Not someone who calls people like you. People like me, he said. Not offended, curious. She gestured vaguely toward the ER. The men you came in with, the SUVs, the way you stood in that room like you owned the walls. She paused. I know who Ryan Kingston is. I've worked this ER for 4 years. I know who ends up in here and why. Then you know he needs people with skills you have. He has surgeons. He has surgeons who don't know him, who don't know what surrounds him. Cole leaned forward slightly. Whoever shot him tonight didn't fail because they had bad aim. They shot him twice in a crowd of people who should have stopped them and didn't. That means something went wrong inside his organization before the trigger was pulled. He paused. That means the danger isn't over. Madison picked up the granola bar. Put it down again. Why are you telling me this? Because you're still here, he said. 4 a.m., shift's over, a surgeon called the death, and you stayed and you checked and you shocked a man back from a flat line that wasn't actually flat. He looked at her steadily. That's not a person who walks away from a thing because it's inconvenient. I'm recognizing that. And I'm telling you that what comes next is going to be complicated, and it would help to have someone who knows what they're doing. I'm going to be very clear with you, Madison said. I am a nurse. I save lives. That's the whole job. What I did tonight was the whole job. What happens in your world? The men with the guns. Whatever went wrong before those SUVs pulled into my bay. That's not my world, and I intend to keep it that way. Cole Mercer looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. He left the card on the table and stood up and moved toward the door with that same deliberate, unhurried quality. And at the door he stopped. The surgery will take another 2 hours at least, he said, without turning around. If it goes badly, Yolanda will be in the family consultation room on 3. You might want to know. He left. Madison sat with the card on the table in front of her and the bad coffee going cold in her hands. Through the wall, she could hear the ordinary sounds of the department continuing. The chime of monitors, the low professional voices of night nurses doing what night nurses do, the world proceeding indifferently around whatever had just happened in this room. She picked up the card, held it, set it back down. Then she picked it up again and put it in her pocket. Ryan Kingston came out of surgery at 6:10 a.m. The surgeon who met Cole in the corridor outside OR 2 was not Hale. Hale had called for backup 2 hours in when the ventricle repair proved more complicated than the initial assessment, and the surgeon who came out was a woman named Dr. Voss, mid-50s, with the exhausted precision of someone who had just done something very difficult and done it well. "He's stable," she told Cole. "Marginally. The ventricular repair held. We're moving him to cardiac ICU for monitored recovery." She paused. "I want to be honest with you about what stable means in this context. It means he didn't die in that room. It doesn't mean the next 48 hours aren't going to be a significant risk. He lost a substantial amount of blood. There's infection risk, arrhythmia risk, a dozen complications we'll be managing hourly." Cole nodded. He asked the questions he asked. Clinical, specific, the questions of a man who had clearly been through this before in some capacity, who understood the vocabulary well enough to ask the real questions instead of the comfortable ones. Madison was at the nurse's station 12 feet away, finishing her documentation, her replacement already on the floor, and giving her the looks that meant the handoff was overdue. She was not listening, or she was trying not to. She heard, "The nurse who brought him back. I want her on his team." She looked up. Cole was not looking at her. He was looking at Voss. Voss was looking at her notes. "That's not standard procedure," Voss said. "She's the only person in this building who knows his full trajectory from the last 6 hours. That's medically relevant. I assign my own nursing staff. I understand that. I'm making a request." A pause. "Please." Madison had not expected the please. From the quality of Voss's silence, neither had she. "I'll see if she's available," Voss said. Madison looked back at her documentation and typed the last entry and saved the chart and told herself very firmly that she was going home to sleep and that whatever happened in the cardiac ICU was above her concern level and that she had done her job and done it well, and that was the end of it. She was in the locker room pulling on her jacket when the text from Patricia came through. "VIP wing, room 14. They're asking for you by name." Madison stood in the locker room with her jacket half on and read the text twice. Then she finished putting on her jacket, picked up her bag, and walked toward the VIP wing. She told herself she was just going to see that he was settled. That was all. Just a visual confirmation that the transfer had gone clean, that the monitors were reading right, that the chest tube was positioned correctly. 2 minutes. Professional due diligence. She was still telling herself that when she pushed open the door to room 14 and found Cole Mercer standing at the window and Ryan Kingston unconscious in the bed, and 4 of Cole's people in the corridor outside, and the hospital's ordinary authority somehow already diminished, the walls somehow already belonging to someone else. Cole looked at her when she came in. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Madison went to the chart. She checked the chest tube. She checked the IV lines. She looked at the monitor and adjusted the alarm thresholds based on his specific post-surgical baseline and pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down and opened the chart to the surgical notes. Cole, from the window, said, "Thank you for coming." "I'm just checking his lines," Madison said. "Of course," Cole said. Neither of them believed it. Outside, down the corridor, the hospital moved into the early morning hours of a day that looked, from the outside, like any other. Shift change approaching, coffee being poured, charts being handed off. The ordinary machinery of a place that kept running regardless of what any individual life did or didn't do inside it. In room 14, Ryan Kingston breathed. And Madison Brooks, who had started her shift 12 hours ago with no intention of changing her life, sat beside him and read his chart and did not go home. The chair was the uncomfortable kind, the kind that had been designed by someone who believed that comfort in a hospital room was a philosophical position they disagreed with. Hard plastic seat, metal arms, the faint smell of disinfectant worked into every surface. Madison had been sitting in it for 40 minutes, and her lower back was registering a formal complaint, and she didn't move. The monitors hummed. Ryan Kingston's chest rose and fell with the mechanical assistance of the ventilator, and the numbers on the screen held where they needed to hold. And the chest tube was draining the way it was supposed to drain, and there was nothing clinically wrong in this room that required her physical presence. She stayed anyway. Cole Mercer had left 20 minutes ago to handle something he hadn't explained. Before he went, he'd positioned a man named Decker outside the door, 20s, thick through the shoulders, the specific stillness of someone trained to hold a position without fidgeting. And Decker had looked at Madison when she came out to check the corridor and then looked away in the manner of a person who had been told she was not a problem. At 7:15, the day shift nurse, A woman named Gloria came in for her assessment and looked at Madison with the polite confusion of someone finding a stranger in her patient's room. "I'm Madison Brooks," Madison said. "Night shift. I was the primary nurse during his resuscitation." "I know who you are," Gloria said. She had the tone of someone who had already heard things. "Dr. Voss asked me to loop you in on assessments." "That was fast." "Dr. Voss moves fast." Gloria pulled on gloves and began her check with the efficiency of a woman who had been doing this since before Madison was in nursing school. "You should know that administration was up here at 6:30. "I figured." "Gerald Marsh." Madison closed her eyes briefly. "Of course." He wanted to know why the VIP wing had been. His word was commandeered. Gloria said it without inflection, the way you repeat a word you find faintly absurd. He spoke to Mr. Mercer for approximately 4 minutes, and then he left, and he had the expression of a man who had just realized he was in a negotiation he hadn't known he'd entered. "Cole has that effect." Gloria looked at her. The look lasted long enough to carry a question she didn't ask out loud. Then she went back to the assessment. "Drainage is good. Pressure's holding at 82/58, which is where Voss wants it for now. He's going to need the vent for at least another 12 hours. She stripped her gloves. "Someone from his organization has been calling the nurses' station every 30 minutes requesting updates." "What are you telling them?" "That the patient is stable and that updates go through authorized contacts only." She looked at Madison again. "Mr. Mercer is the authorized contact. He has a list of 3 other people cleared for information. Everyone else gets nothing." A pause. "There are a lot of people who want to know if he's alive." "I know," Madison said. "Some of them probably want him not to be." "I know that too." Gloria gathered her things. At the door she stopped. "You look like you haven't slept." "My shift ended at 7. "That's not what I asked." She left. Madison looked at Ryan Kingston. The ventilator breathed for him with a patience that machines had and people didn't. His face in unconsciousness was different from what she'd seen in those brief early morning moments of partial lucidity. The deliberate hardness was gone, not softened exactly, but suspended, the way a fist opens when the person holding it falls asleep. He looked like a man who had been through something enormous and had not yet been asked to stand up from it. She was still looking at him when her phone buzzed. "Patricia, Marsh wants you in his office. When you have a moment." His words. His face said immediately. She texted back, "On my way, done." Marsh's office was on the administrative floor, and it smelled, as always, like the particular combination of recycled air and ambition that characterized rooms where decisions were made about other people's problems. He was behind his desk when she came in, and he was not alone. The woman sitting in the chair to his left was someone Madison hadn't seen before. Mid-40s, dark suit, the kind of posture that came from years of sitting in rooms where posture communicated authority before words did. She had a badge on a lanyard that said Karen Solis, Hospital Legal Counsel. Madison sat down in the chair across from Marsh and felt the atmosphere of the room the way you feel weather coming. "Ms. Brooks," Marsh said, "thank you for coming. I'll get to the point." "Please," Madison said. "The events of this morning involve a number of regulatory concerns that the hospital takes seriously." He set his hands flat on the desk, which was his tell. She'd noticed it before, the way he anchored himself physically when the words were going to require it. "A licensed physician declared time of death on a patient. You performed a defibrillation without a physician's order on a patient who had been declared. The patient had a pulse," Madison said. "A pulse that the monitoring equipment did not register, because it was below the monitor's threshold. That's an equipment limitation, not a clinical one." She kept her voice level. "I palpated a radial pulse. I made a clinical judgment call. The patient was resuscitated and is currently in stable condition." Solis spoke for the first time. Her voice was the kind that had been trained at some point, modulated, unhurried, with a precision that meant she chose every word the same way a surgeon chose an incision. "Miss Brooks, I want to be clear that we are not here to penalize you for the outcome. The outcome is remarkable. What we're concerned about is the process. The process saved his life. The process bypassed physician authority on a patient with declared time of death. That's a serious protocol violation regardless of outcome." She paused. "I need to ask you some questions about what you observed and when, and I need your answers to be accurate and complete. I understand. Did you observe any vital signs on the monitor indicating persistent cardiac activity before you initiated defibrillation? No, the monitor showed flat line. Did Dr. Hale or any other physician instruct you to resume resuscitative measures? No. I informed Dr. Hale of my assessment immediately after initiating. So you acted unilaterally. I acted on clinical observation. Madison looked at her. If I was wrong, the defibrillation would have had no effect, and we'd be having a different conversation. I wasn't wrong. Solis made a note. The particular kind of note that didn't mean she agreed, just that she'd recorded the information and would be doing something with it later that Madison would not enjoy. There's also the matter of the patient's continued presence in the VIP wing under both non-standard security arrangements. That's not a nursing matter. It becomes a nursing matter when nursing staff become integrated into those arrangements. She looked up from her notepad. Are you aware of the identity of the patient in VIP Suite 14? I'm aware of the name on his chart. And you understand the implications of that name in terms of the nature of his presence here and what that means for hospital liability? I understand that he's a patient who nearly died and requires post-surgical monitoring. Solis held her gaze for a moment. Ms. Brooks, I'm going to be very direct with you. The hospital's position is complicated by this patient's presence. The people accompanying him have made certain representations about the discretion expected in his care. At the same time, we have regulatory obligations that don't bend for private arrangements. You are in a position where both of those realities intersect, and that is not a comfortable position. No, Madison said, it isn't. We would like to formally document your account of the resuscitation and then discuss the question of your continued involvement in this patient's care. My continued involvement was requested by Dr. Voss. Marsh cleared his throat. Dr. Voss's request is under review. Madison looked at him. Under review, she repeated. Given the broader context, the broader context is that I have specific knowledge of his resuscitation history, his current medications, and the complications most likely to emerge in the next 48 hours, and removing me from his care creates a gap in continuity that is a direct clinical risk. She said it cleanly, without heat, because heat would give them something to respond to. I'll answer every question you have. I'll document everything completely, and then I'm going back to that floor. The room was quiet for a moment. Marsh's desk phone rang. He looked at the number on the display and something happened in his face. That same quick contracting she'd seen before. The alarm he tried to manage before it reached his expression. He picked up. Said yes twice. Said I understand. Set it down. That was the board chair, he said. He sounded like a man adjusting to a change in altitude. Apparently Mr. Mercer made some calls this morning. Solis looked at him. What kind of calls? The kind that come from the board chair's office. He set his hands flat on the desk again. Ms. Brooks, your account of the resuscitation has been noted. You are cleared to continue in your current role regarding this patient. He said it the way a man reads a statement he didn't write and doesn't entirely understand. Legal will follow up on documentation by end of week. Solis closed her notepad. Madison stood up. Thank you for your time, she said, and left the office and walked to the elevator and stood in it alone for the 30 seconds it took to reach the 4th floor. And she leaned against the wall and let out a breath that had been waiting since the moment she sat down in that chair. Cole Mercer, she thought, had very long arms. The first attempt on Ryan Kingston's life happened at 9:47 a.m. Madison almost missed it. She was at the nurse's station, pulling his updated labs when Gloria appeared at her shoulder, moving fast and quiet, and said, in the specific undertone of someone who doesn't want to alarm the corridor, the IV bag on his secondary line. Someone's been in that room. Madison was moving before Gloria finished the sentence. The bag looked right at first glance. Same color, same size. The label was close enough that in the controlled rush of shift change, in the seconds you give a bag when you're managing 6 patients and a call light and a physician barking orders somewhere behind you, you would see what you expected to see. Madison stood in front of it and read the label a second time, and the dosage was wrong by a margin that was not a printing error. Potassium chloride at a concentration that would have stopped his heart inside 4 minutes. She pulled it from the line without touching the label and set it on the table and stepped back and looked at it and felt something cold move through her chest that was not clinical. Who was in here? She said. Gloria was in the doorway. That's what I'm trying to work out. Shift change was 40 minutes ago. The last documented bag check was at 7:50. Dr. Voss did a rounds check at 9:15. Somewhere in that window. Get Cole Mercer, Madison said, right now. The man outside, Decker. Tell Decker to get Cole Mercer. She looked at the bag. And nobody touches anything in this room until I say so. She put on gloves and picked up the bag by the corner and held it at eye level and looked at the label the way you look at something you can't quite believe is in your hands. Whoever had made this had known enough about hospital medication protocol to make it convincing. The format was right. The color coding was right. The placement was exactly where a replacement bag would hang. This was not improvised. This was prepared. Cole came through the door 90 seconds later. He looked at the bag. He looked at Madison. His face went very still in a way she was starting to understand was not calm, but its opposite. The thing that happened to his expression when something required a response that he was not going to allow to be visible. Where was Decker? He said. From the corridor, Decker said, I was on the door. No one came past me. Someone came past, Cola said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A pause. Then, the housekeeping woman came through at 9:20. I checked her cart, checked her badge. Everything matched. What did she look like? 50s, short, gray uniform. The standard. Our housekeeping on this floor has 3 women assigned this morning, Madison said. Their names are on the duty roster at the nurses' station. I can tell you right now whether any of them is in her 50s and short. She went to the nurses' station and came back in 45 seconds. The 3 assigned to this floor are Renata, 28, Keisha, 34, and Marcus, who is male. She looked at Decker. None of them are 50s and short. Decker's face did not move, but something behind his eyes did. The specific recalibration of a person who has just understood the scale of their mistake. Cole looked at him for a long moment. It was the most frightening kind of look. Not angry, not loud, just very steady and very complete. The look of a man filing information. Find out how she got a badge and a cart, he said. And find her. Decker left. Cole turned to Madison. You caught it before it went into his line. The label was close. The concentration was wrong by enough. She set the bag down carefully. Whoever made this knew what they were doing. They've been inside a hospital before, or they had someone teach them. The format wasn't guessed at. I know, Cole said. That means either they have someone on staff here, or they have someone who used to be. He was looking at the door, not at her. His jaw was set at an angle that suggested he was doing arithmetic he didn't like. This is the second attempt. The shooting last night, now this. He turned to her. Whoever is doing this is not stopping. I figured that. Then you understand that him being in this hospital is the problem. This is a building with 200 entry points and 1,000 people in it every day, and we can't control it. He looked at Ryan in the bed. We need to move him. I told you last night, he's 3 days post-surgery with a chest tube and an IV antibiotic drip and a ventilator. I know what he has. Moving him is a significant risk. Leaving him here is a certain one. He looked at her. We have a facility. Off-site. Medical-grade equipment. A room that has 1 door and 4 people I trust with my life guarding it. He paused. What I don't have is someone who can manage his care there. Dr. Voss won't leave the hospital. Madison looked at him. She looked at the bag on the table. She looked at Ryan Kingston, who was breathing with a machine's help and had no idea that 2 people in his room were debating whether he was going to live through the morning. When? She said. Tonight, if I can arrange it. He can't be rushed. The transfer has to be controlled. The equipment's set up before he arrives. Someone has to manage the vent transition. The chest tube has to be, tell me what you need and I'll make it happen. He said it without drama, the way a person states a logistical fact. Whatever you need, equipment, medication, anything, tell me. She looked at him for a long moment. You're asking me to leave this hospital and treat a patient in an unlicensed facility. Yes. That is the end of my nursing license. That is potentially criminal. I know. I want you to understand that I understand that. I do understand it. She picked up his chart. I need a full equipment list, she said. Ventilator, compatible tubing, IV pump, cardiac monitor that reads post-surgical arrhythmia patterns, chest drainage system, full antibiotic formulary, sterile surgical kit in case the chest tube needs repositioning, blood products if you can arrange them, and a backup generator because I am not managing a post-surgical vent patient in the dark. She looked up. I also need 2 hours to get my personal affairs in order, because once we leave, I don't know when I'm coming back. Cole looked at her with that expression she'd seen at various points since 3 a.m. The look of recalibrating what he'd expected. 8 hours, he said. Tonight at midnight. That works, she said. Now go find out how that woman got onto this floor, because if she came in this morning, she might still be in the building. He was already moving toward the door. The discovery that shifted everything came from Yolanda. Yolanda, who had been assigned to Ryan's room at Madison's specific request, who had been the one to stop the false cardiologist, who had the memory of a woman who paid attention because she had learned early that paying attention was what separated manageable situations from catastrophic ones. Yolanda found Madison in the medication room at 11:30 and said, with her voice stripped of its professional overlay, "The CCTV feed to this floor. All 4 cameras. Someone cut it 22 minutes ago." Madison set down what she was holding. "Security's working on restoration," Yolanda said. "They don't know how long." "And Cole?" "I called him. He's not answering." Madison looked at the door to the medication room, then at the hallway through the narrow window in it, then at the clock. 22 minutes of blind corridor. No camera coverage, no visual on anyone who came through the stairwell, the elevator, the supply access at the end of the East Hall. She went to the nurse's station and looked down the corridor toward room 14. Decker was still outside the door, which was something. She looked at the door to the stairwell, closed. The elevator display showed it on 2, moving up. She walked fast to room 14 and opened the door and went inside and pulled a chair from the corner and positioned it where she could see both the door and the monitors simultaneously, and she sat down. Yolanda appeared in the doorway 3 minutes later. She looked at the chair. She looked at Madison. She didn't say anything. She pulled the second chair from the other corner and positioned it on the opposite side of the bed and sat down in it. They watched the door. 11 minutes passed. The ventilator breathed. The monitors traced their lines. Outside, the hospital went about its morning with the indifference of an institution that had survived worse. Then Ryan Kingston's hand moved. Not much. The smallest shift of fingers against the bed rail. The kind of movement that could be involuntary, muscle response beneath sedation, the body doing small, restless things while the mind was somewhere else. Madison leaned forward, his eyes opened. Not all the way. Halfway, the lids heavy with sedation and pain, the focus taking a few seconds to organize itself. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the ventilator tube, and his expression tightened with the reflex aversion that patients always had to that particular sensation of something breathing for them. "You're in the hospital," Madison said. "You had surgery. Try not to fight the vent. It's helping you breathe. Don't try to pull it." His eyes found her. The focus sharpened. It was the same quality she'd noticed in the ER. The mind arriving ahead of the body, urgent and alert, trying to establish the geometry of the situation from whatever information the room provided. His hand moved toward the ventilator tube. "Don't," she said. "I know it's uncomfortable. You're not ready to be off it yet." He looked at her for a long moment. His hand stopped. "You know who I am?" she said. A slow blink. "Yes." "You're in the cardiac ICU. You've been here since about 3 this morning. There have been—" She paused, choosing the right version of the truth. "There have been some security concerns. Cole is handling them." She looked at him steadily. "Are you in pain?" His jaw moved slightly. A small nod. She adjusted his pain medication within the parameters Voss had set, watching his face as she did it. The tightness around his eyes eased by a fraction. He was watching her with the particular concentrated attention of someone who couldn't speak and had redirected everything into observation. "There's something I need you to know," she said. She'd thought about how to say this and decided the direct route was the only one. "We're going to move you tonight, out of this hospital. I'm going to explain why." She watched his face. "Someone has tried twice this morning to get to you here. The hospital environment is too open. Cole has a place that's more controllable." She paused. "It's not ideal medically, but staying here has become the greater risk." He held her gaze. His expression shifted through something she couldn't fully read. Not fear, not anger, something more complicated. Then he looked at the door. then back at her. "I'll be with you," she said. "I'm going to manage your care there." Something moved across his face. She almost missed it. A brief involuntary thing, there and gone in the second it took him to consciously reassemble his expression into something less legible. It might have been relief. It might have been something else entirely. She couldn't tell, and she told herself it didn't matter. He closed his eyes. Madison sat back and looked at the door and thought about midnight and equipment lists and the end of the life she'd built carefully and deliberately over 4 years in this hospital. And she was still sitting with that when Decker knocked on the doorframe and said, in the flat voice of someone delivering information, he's already processed the implications of, "Cole's back. He needs to see you." She found Cole in the corridor outside, and the first thing she noticed was that he was not alone. There was a man with him she hadn't seen before, late 30s, in clothes that were too good for the hospital and too plain to be a physician, and the man had a bruise developing under his right eye and the careful posture of someone managing pain he doesn't want to show. Cole said, "This is what I found in the east stairwell." The man said nothing. "He was on the floor above when I found him," Cole continued. "He had a syringe in his coat pocket. Empty." He looked at Madison. "He's one of ours." It took her a second to understand what that meant. When it landed, she took a breath and held it. One of ours. Not a stranger. Not a hired contractor from outside. Someone from inside Ryan Kingston's own organization. "He knows the layout of this floor," Cole said. "He knew where the camera control junction was. He knew Decker's rotation." He said it without inflection, each fact a stone being set in a row. "He's been here since last night." The man with the bruise looked at Madison and then looked away. Whatever was in his face was not remorse and not defiance. It was the particular blank quality of someone who has gone past the point where expressions serve a purpose and is waiting for whatever comes next. "Who sent you?" Madison said. He didn't answer. "You need to answer that question," she said, "because someone almost put potassium chloride into a ventilated post-surgical patient this morning, and I want to know who decided that was acceptable." He looked at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but a recognition of her that was distinct from how he'd looked at Cole. Like he'd expected a different kind of person and found her instead. "Adrian Blake," he said. Cole went very still. The name meant nothing to Madison. The way it hit Cole meant everything. She watched him receive the name the way you watch someone receive a blow. The body absorbing it before the face does. A slight shift in his stance, a realignment of the muscles in his jaw. "Say it again," Cole said. "Adrian Blake." The man said it with the care of someone who has decided that if this is the end, there is no point in holding the last piece back. "He's been planning this since before the shooting. He had people in position 2 days ago. He knew the route before it happened." He paused. "He knew because Ryan told him." The corridor was very quiet. Madison looked at Cole. Cole was looking at the man, and the thing on his face now was not still and controlled, but something raw and exposed that she understood she was not supposed to see. The specific devastation of a man discovering that the betrayal goes deeper and further back than he had known. "Adrian Blake," Cole said, and his voice had a quality in it that she associated not with anger, but with the thing that lives underneath anger when the anger has nowhere immediate to go. "Ryan's second." "His brother," the man said. The way they talked about it, anyway. Cole looked at Madison. She looked back at him. In the silence between them was the understanding that what they'd been dealing with all morning was not a random threat or an organized outside attack, but something more fundamental, a betrayal at the center of things, with access and knowledge and a timeline that had started before any of this. "We move him tonight," Cole said. "Yes," Madison said, "and we tell no one here, not Voss, not administration, not Gloria." He looked at her. "Didn't you manage his transfer without telling anyone?" She thought about her license. She thought about the potassium chloride bag sitting on the table in room 14. She thought about what it meant that Adrian Blake had known the route before the shooting, that Ryan had told him, that the trust had been so complete and so catastrophically misplaced that the man who should have been protecting him had been using the information to engineer his death. "Yes," she said. "I can manage it." Cole nodded once. He turned to the man with the bruise and said, very quietly, something in a register Madison couldn't quite hear, and the man's face changed, and 2 of Cole's people appeared from the stairwell and took him away. Madison went back into room 14. Ryan Kingston's eyes were open again. He looked at her when she came in, and there was a question in his face that she couldn't answer yet. Not all of it. Not with the ventilator in place. Not until they were somewhere she could give him the full truth in a room that wasn't compromised. She pulled her chair back to the bedside. She looked at the monitors. She looked at the door. Midnight, she thought. 7 hours. She had 7 hours before she crossed a line she would not be able to uncross, and she spent them doing the only thing she knew how to do. She watched his numbers. She managed his pain. She checked his chest tube drainage 3 times and his IV lines twice, and she sat in that chair and kept watch over a man who was alive because she'd pressed 2 fingers to his wrist at the exact right moment, and she told herself that the rest of it, Adrian Blake and the organization and what came after midnight, was something she would deal with when she got there. Outside the window, Chicago went gray with afternoon clouds moving in from the lake, heavy and low, the kind of sky that meant the day was not done with whatever it had planned. The 7 hours did not go quietly. Madison had expected to sit with the weight of midnight and manage it internally, the way she managed most things, by working, by keeping her hands on something useful, by letting the clinical facts of the situation occupy the space where dread wanted to grow. She had a patient on a ventilator with a chest tube and a potassium chloride bag sitting in an evidence bag on the counter and a name, Adrian Blake, that had done something to Cole Mercer's face that she was still thinking about. She had enough to occupy her. What she had not expected was for Ryan Kingston to pull himself back to consciousness at 3:40 in the afternoon with the specific determined quality of a man who had decided that sedation was no longer something he was willing to cooperate with. His eyes opened and stayed open. He looked at the ceiling and then at the ventilator tube and then at Madison with an expression that said, clearly and without ambiguity, that he wanted the tube out. "You're not ready," she said. He looked at her. "Your respiratory function isn't where it needs to be. Another 6 hours on the vent and we reassess." She held his gaze. "I know you don't like it. I know it's uncomfortable. I need you to breathe with it, not against it, because fighting it is costing you energy you don't have to spare." He held her gaze for a long moment. His jaw tightened around the tube. Then, very deliberately, she watched him make the decision. The physical act of a man choosing to cede control of something, which for someone like Ryan Kingston was a transaction with a cost she could only estimate. His shoulders dropped a fraction, his breathing aligned with the machine's rhythm. "Thank you," she said. He cut his eyes at her in a way that said he didn't need the thanks and was filing it under things that didn't require acknowledgement. She almost smiled. She caught it and didn't. Cole came in at 4 with the equipment list she'd given him, printed and annotated in someone else's handwriting with check marks next to every item. He handed it to her, and she went through it line by line, and the check marks were all there. Ventilator, IV pumps, cardiac monitor, chest drainage, the blood products, the backup generator, all of it. Whatever Cole Mercer's organizational reach was, it was sufficient to assemble a functioning ICU in what he described as an underground facility in less than a day. "The location," she said. "What is it?" "A building we own in the West Loop, 4 floors underground. We built it originally for—" He paused, choosing. "Contingency planning." "Contingency for what?" "Exactly this kind of thing." She looked at the list. "Who set up the equipment?" 2 people. Former military medics. They know enough to set it up correctly. They don't know enough to manage his care. What's the transfer vehicle? Modified ambulance. Looks standard from outside. The interior is set up for long-distance critical transfer. He said it without inflection, the way you describe a car you've had for a while. 40 minutes from here to the facility if traffic cooperates. He'll need to be handbagged on the vent during transfer if we can't get a transport vent that interfaces with his current settings. I need to know what ventilator is on site before I agree to the transfer. Puritan Bennett 980. She looked up. That was a $40,000 machine. Where did you get a Puritan Bennett 980? I'm resourceful, Cole said. Ryan, from the bed, made a sound that might have been the closest thing to a laugh that a man on a ventilator could produce. Both of them looked at him. He looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had said nothing. At 6:15 p.m., 40 minutes before Madison's handoff window, Gloria pulled her into the medication room and closed the door. Gloria's face had a quality Madison had not seen on it before. A controlled urgency. The look of someone who had been sitting on information and had just decided the sitting was over. "I need to tell you something," Gloria said. "And I need you to hear it without reacting visibly, because there are people in this corridor I don't know, and I don't know who they're with." Madison made herself very still. "Okay." "The housekeeping woman, the one who got past Decker this morning." Gloria folded her hands in front of her. "I've been thinking about the badge. Decker said it matched. He checked it. A matched badge means it was either stolen or issued, and if it was issued, there's a record, and records live in administration systems." She paused. "I have a friend in administration. I asked her to run a quiet check." "And?" "The badge was issued 3 weeks ago to a temporary contract employee. The name on the record is Sylvia Ruiz." She looked at Madison. "Sylvia Ruiz doesn't exist. The Social Security number on the application is assigned to a woman who died in 2019 in Tampa. The address is a vacant lot in Pilsen." She unfolded her hands. "Someone built a false identity specifically to get a hospital badge 3 weeks ago, before Ryan Kingston was even shot. The silence in the medication room had a specific weight. That means this wasn't reactive," Madison said. "They didn't improvise after the shooting failed. They had someone in place before the shooting," Gloria said. "Yes." Madison looked at the door. Through the small window in it, she could see the corridor. Ordinary, busy, the late afternoon shift in full motion. Ordinary people doing ordinary hospital work. She looked at each face she could see and thought, 3 weeks ago, someone decided a man needed to die and began building the infrastructure for it with the patience and specificity of someone who had done this before. "Does Cole know?" she said. "I'm telling you first," Gloria said, "because you're the one in that room." Madison thought about Adrian Blake, about the timeline the man with the bruise had described, that the planning had started before the shooting, that Ryan had told Adrian the route, and now this, a false identity seeded into the hospital's employment system weeks before the ambush, which meant that Adrian Blake, or whoever was coordinating this, had planned for the possibility that Ryan might survive the shooting, had prepared for it, had put an asset in place in case he needed to be finished afterward. The ambush was the first attempt. The hospital was always supposed to be the second. "I need you to not tell anyone else what you just told me," Madison said. "Not administration, not security, not yet." Gloria looked at her steadily. "How long?" "Until tomorrow morning." A pause. "That's a long time to sit on something like this." "I know. I'm asking anyway." Gloria looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a woman who was not naive and had not been for some time, and was making a calculation about trust that she knew was not entirely defensible on paper. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "After that, I'm taking it to Marsh." "That's fair," Madison said. She left the medication room and walked to room 14 and stood in the doorway and looked at Ryan Kingston and thought, "Someone built this cage around you before you walked into it. And the man who built it is someone you call brother." At 7:00 p.m., she went home. She had 2 hours. She packed the way a person packs when they don't know how long they'll be gone and can't ask anyone for advice about it, practically, without sentiment, the things that mattered and could fit in a bag and the things that would have to wait. She stood in her apartment for a moment before she left and looked at it. Small, functional, organized with the precision of a person who'd learned that chaos at home made the chaos at work harder to bear. 4 years of her life in the arrangement of furniture and the stack of nursing journals on the table and the photograph on the shelf of her and her mother at Madison's graduation from nursing school. Her mother's arm around her shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun. She looked at that photograph for a long time. Then she picked up her bag and left. They moved Ryan Kingston at 11:52 p.m. The transfer took 11 minutes from room to vehicle, which was 8 minutes longer than Cole had planned, and 3 minutes shorter than Madison had feared. The vent transition was the hard part, the moment of switching him from the hospital's ventilator to the transport unit, a window of manual bagging that lasted 90 seconds and felt like 6 years. His oxygen saturation dipped to 89, and Madison said nothing out loud and adjusted the bag rate and watched the number come back up to 94 and held that breath until it hit 96. "Good," she said to herself, to him, to the universe in general. In the ambulance, she sat at his head and monitored, and the vehicle moved through the city with the quiet purposefulness of something that had learned to be invisible. No sirens. the kind of speed that was fast without announcing itself. Cole sat across from her and watched the rear doors with the focused attention of someone who expected them to be tested. They weren't. The facility, when they arrived, was accessed through a parking structure, down 2 levels, through a door that required a keypad and a secondary biometric, into a corridor that was cool and very clean and lit with the flat institutional brightness of a place that had been built to function rather than to comfort. The room at the end of it had been set up with a precision that surprised her. The Puritan Bennett was positioned correctly relative to the bed. The IV poles were arranged in the configuration she would have chosen. The monitor leads were organized. The chest drainage system was ready to connect. She spent 20 minutes getting him settled and connected and assessed, and when she was done, she stood at the bedside and looked at his numbers. And the numbers were not good, but they were not worse than they'd been at the hospital, and that was the threshold she'd set herself. "Okay," she said quietly. "We're here." He was conscious, barely, but there. His eyes tracked her movement around the bed with the determined focus of a man who had decided that tracking things was the activity available to him, and he was going to do it completely. "The vent settings are the same as the hospital," she told him. "Everything transferred clean. Your pressure is low but stable. We're going to reassess the vent in the morning." She looked at him. "You're safe here." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. She had started to catalog his expressions, the deliberate blankness he used in front of Cole, the pain he thought he was hiding, the flicker of something unguarded that appeared and disappeared in the space of a breath. This one was new. It was closer to something honest than the others, and she couldn't tell if that was the vulnerability of his physical state or something else. She looked away first, went to chart. The first crisis of the night came at 3:10 a.m. She woke from a half-sleep in the chair at his bedside to an alarm she recognized before she was fully conscious. The specific pitch of a cardiac arrhythmia alarm, not the flat, desperate sound of a flatline, but the irregular, urgent pattern of a heart doing something it wasn't supposed to do. She was at the monitor before her eyes had fully adjusted to the light. Atrial fibrillation. His heart had gone into AFib, which was a known complication of chest surgery, and particularly of the kind of ventricular repair he'd had, and which was manageable but required immediate intervention with the right medication at the right dose. And she had to do it without a physician order because there was no physician here, there was only her. She pulled the medication from the kit, amiodarone, the right choice, the loading dose, and she calculated his weight from the chart, and she drew it up and she pushed it through his IV, and she stood at the monitor and watched the rhythm, the way you watch something you need to negotiate with. It took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The rhythm converted. Sinus rhythm, back, imperfect but organized. The monitor settling into the pattern that meant the heart had found its way back to something workable. She let out a breath. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed that with a kind of detached interest, that after everything, her hands were still steady. She didn't know what that meant about her. She suspected she'd think about it later, when there was time for thinking about what things meant. Ryan was awake. He'd been awake through it, she realized. His eyes open, tracking the monitor with the helpless, focused attention of a man watching something that was happening to his own body and being unable to do anything about it. "It's called atrial fibrillation," she said. "It's a complication of your surgery. It's not uncommon. I medicated you for it and your rhythm has converted back to normal." She looked at him. "You're okay." He held her gaze, nodded once. Then he looked at the ceiling and she watched his jaw move and understood that what she was watching was a man managing something. Not the physical crisis, which was over, but something internal. The particular interior work of a person who has spent years being the most controlled presence in every room he occupies and is now, for the first time in longer than he can probably account for, entirely dependent on someone else. She sat down. "I know this is hard," she said. She didn't say it with softness. She said it straight, the way she said the clinical facts. Being in a position where you can't function the way you're used to functioning, where someone else is making the decisions. She looked at the monitor. "But you need to let me do this. I can't make you better if you're spending your energy on everything except healing." A long pause. Then his hand moved on the bed rail. Not toward her, not the reaching gesture of someone asking for something. Just a shift, a repositioning, the way a person moves when they've decided to accept the terms of a situation they can't alter. She took it as agreement and went back to charting. What? At 8 a.m. Cole came into the room with coffee, real coffee, not the powdered institutional kind, and the smell of it hit Madison before he came through the door, and she was not ashamed of the response it produced in her. He handed her a cup and looked at Ryan's chart and said nothing for a moment. He went into AFib at 3, Madison said. I know. The monitor feeds to a terminal upstairs. I saw it. He looked at her over the rim of his own cup. You handled it without waking me. You couldn't have done anything useful. No, he said, but I'd have wanted to know. I'll wake you next time, she said. He looked at Ryan. Ryan looked back at him with the eyes of a man who had things to say and no mechanism to say them. We need to talk about Adrian, Cole said. Not to Madison, to Ryan directly, the way you talk to someone when the conversation has been delayed long enough that delaying it further is its own kind of decision. Can you... He glanced at Madison. Is he clear enough? Cognitively, yes. He's limited by the vent. You can ask yes or no questions. Cole pulled a chair to the bedside and sat with his forearms on his knees and looked at Ryan with the specific expression of someone who has rehearsed how to begin something and has found, in the moment, that the rehearsal was inadequate. I need you to tell me, he said, how much Adrian knew about the Marconi meeting, about the route. He paused. About your contingency protocols. Ryan held his gaze, one blink, deliberate. He knew everything, Cole said. Not a question. Another blink. Cole was quiet for a moment. His jaw moved slightly, the way Madison had seen it move when he was absorbing information and filing it somewhere it wouldn't be visible. The Marconi meeting was your idea, he said. You set it up. You told me and Adrian and no one else. He paused. And they were waiting. In the right place, at the right time, with the right weapons and the right number of people. Ryan looked at the ceiling. The briefest look, gone in a second, but she saw it. The specific involuntary movement of a person confronting a recognition they have already made and have not yet finished the work of absorbing. You already knew, Cole said, before any of this. You already suspected him. The silence that followed was answer enough. Cole stood up. He walked to the far side of the room and stood with his back to them for a moment, and Madison watched the line of his shoulders and understood that what she was looking at was a man doing something violent and internal that he was not going to let become external. How long? He said, without turning. Ryan's hand moved. He lifted 2 fingers from the bed rail, then a thumb. 3. 3 months, Cole said. Ryan's eyes closed briefly. You've been watching him for 3 months, and you didn't tell me. Cole turned around. His voice was level in a way that required effort she could hear. Why? Ryan looked at him with an expression that contained, Madison thought, a kind of apology that wasn't in the vocabulary of what his face usually did. Not comfortable there, not practiced, but present. Because you would have moved too fast, Cole said. You would have gone at him before you had everything, before you knew who else was involved. He looked at Ryan for a long moment. And you were right. I would have. He sat back down. Who else? Ryan lifted one finger. One other person. A slow blink. Do I know them? The blink again. Cole looked at his hands. Is it someone in this room? Ryan's eyes went to Madison. She went still. Cole followed his gaze. He looked at Madison with an expression that held no accusation. It was more careful than that, more measuring. The look of a man who does not make the mistake of reacting before he has the data. Not you, he said. Ryan's head moved. Barely. The smallest negative motion against the pillow. Then who? Ryan looked at Cole. His right hand moved on the rail. Index finger, middle finger, then the fingers walked 2 steps. A gesture that Madison didn't understand, but Cole apparently did, because his face changed completely. He went white. Not pale. White. The color left his face in the specific rapid way that happens to people when the body is redirecting every available resource to the brain because the brain has just received something that requires immediate processing. Decker, Cole said. Ryan's eyes closed. The room held that word. Decker, who had been on the door. Decker, who had let the housekeeping woman through. Decker, who had been with Cole's organization for 4 years, and who Cole had described as solid, and who had been positioned at the one door that Matt had a badge in her cart. Decker, who had known their positioning inside the hospital well enough to tell someone where the corridor camera control junction was. "Where is he now?" Madison said. Cole was already standing. He had his phone out, and he was calling someone, and when the call connected, he said 4 words: "Find Decker, right now." He walked out of the room. Madison stood at the bedside. Ryan Kingston was looking at her with an expression that she had not seen on him before. Stripped of everything he normally used to manage how he was perceived, the hardness and the deliberate opacity, all of it gone. What was left was a man who was exhausted and in pain and had been carrying the knowledge of his own betrayal alone for 3 months, while pretending to trust a man who was engineering his death, and who was now lying in this bed with a machine breathing for him, finding out that the rot went deeper than even he had tracked. "I'm sorry," she said. She didn't know what else to say. She said it because it was true. She was sorry for what this cost him, for the specific cruelty of discovering that the people closest to you are sometimes the most precisely calibrated instruments of your destruction. He looked at her. The stripped expression held for one more moment, then slowly the layers came back. Not all of them, not the full armor, but enough. He was building himself back in real time, and she watched it happen, and she did not look away because this time, too, looking away felt like abandonment. His hand moved on the rail. She looked down at it. His index finger extended and tapped once. Just once. A small, deliberate motion. She didn't know what it meant, but she held her position beside the bed and did not leave. Cole came back 22 minutes later. The white was gone from his face, replaced by something colder and more settled. The expression of a man who has moved through the shock and arrived somewhere operational on the other side. "Decker's gone," he said. "His phone is off. His car is gone from the garage." He stood in the doorway. "He left sometime after we transferred last night. He knew we were moving." "He would have told Adrian," Madison said. "He already told Adrian, that's certain." Cole looked at Ryan. "Which means Adrian knows we're out of the hospital. He knows we're somewhere off-site. He doesn't know exactly where, but he knows the general parameters. West Loop, underground, the facility." He paused. "He might already know the address, if Decker knew it." "Did Decker know the address?" Madison said. Cole's jaw set. "He knew we had a facility in the West Loop. He's driven past the building. Whether he connected the building to a specific address..." He stopped. "I don't know." "You need to assume he did." "I am assuming he did." "Then we need to move Ryan again." "We can't move him again." Cole's voice had a controlled force in it. "He just survived the first transfer. Another one. Then we need to make this facility defensible," Madison said. "Right now, today. Because if Adrian Blake knows this address, we have hours, maybe less." The 3 of them were quiet for a moment, the weight of that calculation settling on each of them differently. For Cole, it was tactical. For Madison, it was medical, and something else, something she hadn't named yet. For Ryan Kingston, who could not speak, and could not stand, and could not do the things he had spent his life doing. When situations became dangerous, it was something she could only imagine. The specific, particular helplessness of a powerful person made suddenly powerless, and the determination she could see building behind his eyes that said he was not going to stay that way any longer than physics required. His hand moved again. This time he was clearly reaching toward the ventilator tube, but not with the reflex aversion of earlier, with intention. "Don't," Madison said. He looked at her. "You're not ready. I told you." He looked at her with an expression that said, with absolute clarity, "I need to be able to speak." She looked at his numbers. Oxygen saturation 95, respiratory rate 12, which was the vent rate, and the question was whether he was overriding it. She watched the waveform and counted, and there, between the vent breaths, was a small spontaneous effort. His lungs were trying. Imperfectly, inconsistently, but they were trying. She looked at Cole. Cole looked at her. "If I trial him off the vent and his sats drop below 90, he goes back on," she said. "No negotiation." Cole nodded. She looked at Ryan. "Nod if you understand." He nodded. She prepared what she needed. She talked him through it. What to expect, how it would feel. The instruction to breathe slowly and not to panic if the first few breaths felt insufficient, because they would, and the panic would make it worse. She watched his face while she talked, and he listened with his whole body, the way people listen when the information is about their own survival. She took out the ventilator tube. He coughed. the tearing, painful cough of someone whose airway has been occupied for the better part of 12 hours. And she helped him through it, one hand at his back, and she watched his sats and they dipped to 92 and she said, "Breathe, slow, you've got it." And she watched him fight through the reflex and find a breath, and then another. 93. 94. He looked at the ceiling and breathed. His chest moved with the ragged effort of it. His color was bad. His jaw was tight with pain that the movement of breathing woke in the chest wound. "Okay?" she said. His voice, when it came, was barely a voice, hoarse and thin and stripped of everything that made it his, but it was there. "Adrian has my sister," he said. The room stopped. "Chloe." He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the stripped expression was back, but different from before, but not exhausted, not vulnerable. Something that had gone past both those things into a territory that had no name she knew for it. He took her, 3 days ago, before the shooting. He looked at Cole. "That's why I went to the Marconi meeting. He said he'd have her killed if I didn't show." Cole sat down. He sat down the way a person sits when their legs have made a decision independently of the rest of them. "You went to a meeting you knew was a trap," Cole said. "I went to a meeting to buy time." Ryan's voice was gaining something back with each sentence. Not volume, but the quality that made it his, the deliberate weight of it. "He has her somewhere. He's been using her as the guarantee that I wouldn't run or fight back or call in resources." He stopped to breathe. The effort of talking was significant and visible. "The plan was that I'd die at Marconi and the syndicate would go to Adrian and Chloe would disappear. That was the arrangement, him and whoever he made it with." "Where is she?" Cole said. "I don't know." The two words cost him something. She could see it in the set of his jaw. That particular strain of a man who has always known things and is facing the specific terror of not knowing the one thing that matters most. "He wouldn't tell me. She's the leverage. The leverage only works if I can't verify she's alive and can't locate her." Madison looked at him. She looked at the monitor. His blood pressure was climbing, not dangerously, but moving in the wrong direction with the physiological stress of the conversation, the chest wound, the effort of breathing without mechanical assistance. "You need to stop talking," she said. "Your pressure—" "My sister is 23 years old," he said. He looked at Madison, not at Cole. He looked at her with an expression that she understood, in the specific register of it, was the most honest thing she'd seen on his face since the first moment she'd registered that he was alive. "She has nothing to do with any of this. She's never had anything to do with any of this. She's—" His voice caught on something. He stopped. He looked at the ceiling. "She teaches music," he said finally. "Elementary school. She teaches kids to play the violin." The room was very quiet. Madison said, "Cole." Cole was already standing. "We find her," Cole said. It was not the voice he used for logistics. It was something older and flatter and absolutely certain. "We find her first. Everything else—" The door to the facility came open. Not the main door. The interior access from the floor above. The door that should have required the keypad and the biometric, and that was supposed to be known only to Cole's most trusted people. It opened. And the man who came through it was not one of Cole's most trusted people. He was late 40s, compact and well-dressed, with the particular settled authority of a man accustomed to entering rooms that belonged to other people and making them his. He had 2 men behind him, and the men had weapons, and they had the weapons up and positioned before the door finished opening, and Madison understood in the half-second before anything else that the information had not taken hours to reach Adrian Blake. It had already been here. Decker had not just told him the address. Decker had given him access. The keypad code. The biometric override. The entire architecture of the place Cole had built to be a fortress, given to the man it was built to keep out. Adrian Blake looked at Ryan Kingston in the bed. He looked at Cole. He looked at Madison with the brief evaluating glance of someone categorizing a variable they hadn't been told about and filing it without visible surprise, because a man like this had encountered variables and absorbed them for long enough that nothing surprised him easily. Then he looked back at Ryan and he smiled. It was not a warm smile, and it was not a cold one. It was the smile of a man who has spent 3 months moving pieces across a board and has just watched the final piece arrive at the square he intended. "Ryan," he said, "you look terrible." Ryan looked at him. The expression on his face was the one Madison had been trying to read since she first understood he was alive. And she understood it now, fully, in the specific clarity that comes when context finally catches up to observation. It was not fear. It was not even hatred, though both were underneath it. It was the expression of a man who has seen this moment coming for 3 months and has spent every one of those months calculating how it ends, and who is now, for the first time, entirely out of calculations. "Where's Chloe?" Ryan said. Adrian tilted his head slightly. "That depends," he said, "entirely on how the next few minutes go." Madison looked at the crash cart beside the bed. She looked at the IV pump. She looked at the layout of the room and the position of the 2 armed men and the distance between herself and the door and the distance between Adrian Blake and Ryan Kingston, and she ran the math on all of it in the 3 seconds she had before Adrian Blake looked at her again with the assessing quality of a man deciding what category she belonged in. "You're the nurse," he said. "I'm the nurse," she said. "Then you're not my problem," he said. He said it with the particular dismissiveness of a man who has categorized her as peripheral, a technical element, a variable without agency, someone who could be managed by simply removing her from the equation. He had, Madison thought, made a very serious mistake. She kept her face still and her hands visible, and she looked at Ryan Kingston, and Ryan Kingston looked back at her. And in the exchange between them, in the 2 seconds of eye contact that was all they had before Adrian Blake crossed the room, something passed that neither of them could have named precisely. A current of understanding that ran below language and below the categories that normally governed what she was willing to do. She had crossed every line she'd told herself she wouldn't cross. She had left the hospital and left the license behind and driven through the city at midnight and managed a ventilator in an unlicensed facility and shocked a man who had been declared dead and sat through the night in a plastic chair, watching his numbers with her whole body oriented toward keeping them in range. She had done all of that, and now Adrian Blake was in the room. And Ryan Kingston's 23-year-old sister, who taught violin to elementary school children, was somewhere that no one in this room could reach. Madison's hand was 6 inches from the IV pump. She had no plan. She had a crash cart and a medication kit and 6 inches, and the specific quality of attention that came from 4 years of managing crises in spaces where every second of delay had a body count. And she had the fact that Adrian Blake had looked at her and decided she was not his problem. She was going to be his problem. 6 inches. Madison's hand was 6 inches from the IV pump, and Adrian Blake was crossing the room toward Ryan's bed, and the 2 armed men had their weapons up, and Cole was standing with his hands at his sides in the specific stillness of a man who is calculating whether there is a move available to him and has not yet found it, and all of that was happening in the space of a breath. She moved on the exhale. Not toward Adrian, not toward the door. She moved toward the crash cart, the direction no one was watching because no one in this room had assessed her as a threat, and she got her hand on the defibrillator before the near of the 2 armed men processed that she was moving at all. "Stop," he said. She stopped. Hands visible. The defibrillator paddle in her right hand, which was not a weapon by any conventional measure, but was a device that delivered 200 joules of electrical current on contact, and she was close enough to the nearer man that the geometry was not entirely unfavorable. Adrian Blake turned to look at her. "Put that down," he said. He said it with the patience of a man who is not yet concerned. "I'm a nurse," Madison said. "This is medical equipment. I'm standing next to a post-surgical patient with a cardiac history, and I'm not putting down the defibrillator." A pause. Adrian looked at her with the evaluating quality she'd seen when he came through the door, the rapid categorizing, the variable being assessed. He looked at the paddle in her hand. He looked at Ryan. "She's not a problem," he said to the nearer man. "Leave her." The man lowered his weapon by 2 inches, not all the way. 2 inches, which was a concession that meant nothing in practical terms, but told her that Adrian had moved her to a lower tier of his attention, which was exactly where she needed to be. She stayed where she was, defibrillator in hand, 6 feet from Ryan's bed and 8 feet from Cole and 4 feet from the nearer armed man. And she ran the numbers on all 3 distances and kept her face at clinical neutral and her breathing at the rate that suggested a person who was frightened and compliant and had no intentions. Adrian reached Ryan's bedside. He stood there and looked down at him with the expression she had not expected. Not triumphant, not cold, but something more complex and in its complexity, more disturbing. He looked at Ryan with the expression of a man who genuinely grieves what he is doing and has decided to do it anyway, which was worse than cruelty because cruelty was simpler, and this was something that had history in it, weight in it, years of something that had once been real before it became this. "You look like hell," Adrian said. His voice was quiet, personal, the voice of someone who has known the man in the bed for a long time. "I didn't want this to go this way." Ryan looked up at him. His breathing was labored, the chest wound, the effort of talking earlier, the physiological hit of adrenaline on a body that had nothing spare to spend. But his eyes were completely clear and completely present, and what was in them was not fear. "Where is she?" Ryan said. "She's fine." "That's not what I asked." Adrian looked at him for a moment. "She's somewhere safe. She'll stay safe as long as this conversation goes the way it should." "What conversation is that?" Ryan said. "You came here with guns." "I came here with an offer." Adrian pulled the chair from the corner, Madison's chair, the one she'd spent 7 hours in, and sat down in it and leaned forward with his forearms on his knees in the posture of a man who intends to have a reasonable discussion and wants his body language to make that clear. "I want you to sign the transfer papers, the syndicate documentation, everything that makes the transition formal and legal by our standards." He paused. You do that. Chloe comes home tonight. You have my word." "Your word," Ryan said. "I know what that sounds like right now." "Do you?" "Ryan." Adrian's voice shifted. The reasonableness cracked slightly at the edge of it, revealing something older and more fraught underneath. "We built this together, both of us, 15 years. I didn't do this because I wanted you dead. I did this because you wouldn't listen. You wouldn't share the chair. You wouldn't. You shot me," Ryan said. "Twice. In a parking lot. You put someone in that hospital to finish the job. You took my sister." His voice was hoarse and thin and cost him visibly with every word, but the words themselves were absolutely even. "And now you're sitting in a chair in the room where I'm trying not to die and telling me you didn't want this to go this way." The silence that followed was the most honest moment in the room. Adrian Blake looked at the man he had known for 15 years. He looked at him with something that, had it been in any other context, Madison might have called pain. "Sign the papers," he said. "That's all." "And then what?" Ryan said. "You let us go, all of us." He looked at Cole. "Cole, Madison, everyone in this facility, you just let us go." "That was never the goal. The goal was the syndicate." "And I'm supposed to believe Ryan." Adrian's voice had gone flat. The grief or whatever it was had cleared out of it, and what was left was the voice of a man who has made decisions he considers final. "I have 12 people in this building right now, 2 on every exit, 2 on the floor above, 2 outside. And I have Chloe in a location that you don't know and can't find." He looked at him steadily. "You have a chest tube and 1 nurse and Cole, who is standing very still because he's smart enough to know that the math doesn't work." He paused. "Sign the papers," Cole said from across the room. "He can't sign anything. His right hand is fine," Adrian said without looking at Cole. "I read the surgical notes." A pause. "Yes. I have someone in the hospital record system. I've had someone in the record system since the day he was admitted. I know exactly what his injuries are, and I know exactly what he can and can't do." He looked at Ryan. "He can hold a pen." Ryan looked at the ceiling. The look lasted 3 seconds. Madison watched his chest rise and fall with the painful effort of breathing, and she watched the monitor, and his blood pressure was at 94/60, and she watched it and held her position, and she was thinking simultaneously about the defibrillator in her hand and the medication kit on the counter and the IV pump, and Adrian Blake's 2 armed men and the specific physical layout of the room and the 12 people Adrian said were in this building, and the fact that Cole was standing 8 feet away with nothing in his hands, and his eyes doing something she recognized as the same calculation she was doing, running the same numbers, looking for the same gap. She looked at the nearer armed man. I was watching Cole primarily. Cole was the physical threat in the room, the one that registered as requiring attention. His angle on Madison was peripheral. He had not pointed the weapon at her since Adrian told him to leave her alone. She looked at the IV pump. The IV pump was running Ryan's antibiotic drip. It was a Baxter Sigma, which she knew because she'd set it up herself when they arrived, and she knew exactly what it contained and at what rate. And she knew that if she changed the rate setting and the alarm triggered, it would make a sound in this room at a volume that would cause everyone in it to react. Reactions were movement. Movement was a gap. She began moving slowly toward the IV pump. Not toward it directly. She angled toward the monitor first, as if checking a reading, which was a thing she had done approximately 40 times in this room and which had the established quality of routine. The nearer man tracked her movement with the periphery of his attention and then returned his focus to Cole because she was the nurse, and nurses moved around the room, and that was what nurses did. She reached the monitor. She looked at the numbers. She moved 2 steps left toward the IV pump, and she had her hand on the rate setting, and she looked at Cole. Cole looked back at her. She held up 2 fingers. Then 1. Her free hand at her side, the one neither of the armed men was watching because she was the nurse and she was adjusting the monitor and adjusting an IV pump, and those were the activities of a peripheral variable. Cole read it. She saw him read it. The slight shift in his weight, forward and onto the balls of his feet, the change in his hands from loose to ready. She changed the IV pump rate. The alarm was not subtle. It was a sustained 2-tone, 85 decibels, the specific urgent sound designed to cut through the ambient noise of a medical environment and register as requiring immediate attention, and in a room that was not a medical environment with armed men whose nervous systems were already running at elevated alert. It was not merely a sound. It was a flinch trigger. Both men turned toward the alarm. Cole moved. He crossed the 8 feet to the farther man in the time it took the alarm to sound twice, which was not much time but was enough. And he was on the man before the man had fully processed the direction of the sound, and the gun went down between them, and the struggle for it was loud and immediate and physical in the way that real physical struggles are. Ugly, close, without any of the choreography that the word fight suggested. Madison drove the defibrillator paddle into the nearer man's forearm. Not a charged strike. The paddles weren't charged. She hadn't had time. But 800 grams of hard medical-grade plastic swung at close range against the radial nerve cluster of a man whose attention had been on the alarm and then on Cole produced a result that was good enough. The gun dropped. The man grabbed his arm and his face did something involuntary, and she stepped back and the gun was on the floor between them and they were both looking at it. She got there first. She had never held a gun in her life. She held this one with both hands the way she'd seen it done, which was inadequate technically and sufficient circumstantially, and she pointed it at the man's center mass and she said, "Don't." And her voice came out completely steady, which surprised her in the second she registered it. The man looked at her, at the gun, at her face. He stayed where he was. Across the room, Cole had the second man on the floor and the second gun in his hand and his knee on the man's back with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this enough that it had a form to it. Adrian Blake had stood up from the chair. He was not panicking. That was the thing about him. In the chaos of the last 10 seconds, in the alarm and the struggle and the gun on the floor, he had stood up from the chair and taken 2 steps back toward the wall, and that was all. And he was watching the room with the focused attention of a man recalculating, not retreating, his eyes going to Cole and to Madison and to Ryan in the bed and to the door, and back to Cole with the speed of someone running scenarios. "You have 1 gun," he said to Madison. "I have 12 people in this building." "You have 10, Cole said from the floor, where he was zip-tying the second man's wrists with something he'd pulled from his jacket. "I had 2 of my people come in through the south access 30 minutes ago." He looked up at Adrian. "The access code Decker gave you is the decoy code. It locks the south stairwell from the inside when it's used. Your 2 people on the floor above are currently locked in a stairwell." He stood up. "So 10. Adrian looked at him. "I've known Decker was yours for 6 days, Cole said. "I let him run. I fed him the address and the code, and I let him give it to you because I needed to know when you were coming." He picked up the second gun. "So you could come here." "You wanted me here," Adrian said. "I wanted you somewhere I controlled the exits." Cole looked at him with the expression Madison had come to understand as his most dangerous, the flat, settled, completely resolved look of a man who has been planning something for long enough that the moment of it has arrived without surprise. "Where's Chloe?" "You think I'm going to—" "I think," Cole said, "that in about 4 minutes my people are going to have finished with your people on the south stairs, and then they're going to start working through your remaining 10. And I think the window in which Chloe's location has value to you as leverage is going to close." He walked toward Adrian. So I'm going to ask you once, and I want you to think carefully about what you know about me before you decide how to answer. Where is Chloe Kingston? Adrian Blake looked at Cole Mercer. He looked at him with the calculating quality of a man assessing a threat, and the particular recognition of someone who has known that threat for 15 years and understands its specific parameters. Cole was not bluffing. That was the thing. Madison could see Adrian understanding that Cole was not bluffing, and that the recognition was costing him something in his calculations. She's at the Wicklow building, Adrian said. West Jackson, 14th floor, Unit 4. He said it with the flat quality of someone surrendering a card they've decided is no longer playable. 2 men. She's not hurt. Cole pulled out his phone and made a call without taking his eyes off Adrian, and said the address and unit number and said, "Go now," and hung up. Adrian looked at Ryan. Ryan was watching from the bed. He had not spoken during any of it. The effort of it earlier had cost him, and his color was bad, and his breathing was the labored, shallow breathing of someone managing pain without the option of stopping to manage it. But his eyes had tracked everything, and they were on Adrian now with an expression that was not what Madison expected. It was grief, genuine and complete, the grief of someone who has lost something that preceded all of this, something that existed before the ambush and the hospital and the facility and the guns, something that went back 15 years to whatever the beginning of this had been. Why? Ryan said. Just that. Adrian looked at him. The calculating quality left his face for a moment. What came through in its absence was something that, in another context, might have been called honesty. Because you were never going to give me the chair, Adrian said, and I spent 15 years believing you would, and I got tired of believing it. The room was quiet. Then Ryan said, "You could have asked me." Adrian Blake looked at him for a long moment. "I did," he said quietly. 3 times, last year." He paused. "You don't remember." The silence that followed had a different quality from the others. Madison stood with the gun in her hands, and the alarm still sounding on the IV pump, and she watched Ryan Kingston's face process that sentence, and she watched the grief on it shift into something more complicated. The expression of a man who does not entirely know what is true, and cannot verify it, and must live with the not knowing. "Turn off the alarm," Cole said to Madison, without looking at her. She went to the pump and silenced it. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet after sustained noise, the absence of sound as a physical thing. A burst of noise from the corridor above. 2 sharp impacts, voices, something falling. Cole's head came up. His hand tightened on the gun. The sounds resolved into footsteps coming fast down the interior stairs, and the door opened and a man came through. One of Cole's, broad-shouldered, breathing hard, a cut on his jaw that was fresh and bleeding. "South stairs are clear," he said. "We have 4 of Blake's people secured. The other 6 are positioned on the upper floors. They haven't moved yet. They're waiting for word from Blake." Everyone looked at Adrian Blake. Adrian was looking at Ryan. "Call them off," Ryan said. Adrian held his gaze. The calculating quality had been gone from his face for long enough now that what was left looked almost like the man he might have been before whatever had happened between them had happened. "If I call them off," he said, "what then?" "I don't know yet," Ryan said. "Call them off." A pause. Adrian reached into his jacket, slowly, in the manner of a man demonstrating that the movement was deliberate and not a threat, and he pulled out a phone and made a call and said, "Stand down," and said, "Yes." "Stand down," and said, "Because I said so," and hung up. Cole's man went back upstairs. The room settled into a new configuration. Adrian against the wall, the 2 disarmed men zip-tied on the floor, Cole with a gun. He wasn't pointing at anyone in particular. Madison beside the bed with a gun she was holding, the way a person holds something they've never held and hope to put down soon. Ryan Kingston reached out and touched Madison's wrist. Not the grabbing reach of urgency, just a touch, 2 fingers, the same gesture with which she'd found his pulse in the ER at 2:48 a.m., except reversed. And she looked at him, and he looked at her and he said, "Put it down. You don't have to hold it." She put the gun on the counter. Her hands were shaking. She noticed it now that they were empty, the tremor working through them from the wrists, the adrenaline completing its transaction. She pressed them flat on the counter and breathed through it, and it passed. "You need to lie down," she told Ryan. "You've been up too long. Your pressure is dropping." "In a minute." "Not in a minute. Now." He looked at her with the expression that she was starting to understand was his version of a smile. Not the thing on his face, but the thing behind it. The flicker of something that acknowledged a line without crossing it. He shifted back against the pillow. She checked his pressure. 88/55, low but not collapsing. She adjusted his drip and checked the chest tube drainage and counted his respiratory rate, and her hands, by the time she was done, had stopped shaking. Cole's phone rang. He answered it and listened, and his face did something Madison had not seen it do. It changed completely and at once, the control breaking not into panic, but into something that was its own kind of relief, sudden and disorienting in its completeness. "She's there," he said. He looked at Ryan. "She's there. She's okay. 2 men secured. Chloe is. She's okay." Ryan closed his eyes. He kept them closed for 4 seconds. Madison counted. When he opened them, they were clear and very tired, and the grief was still there, but it had changed shape. It was grief that knew its worst possibility had been avoided, and that was a different grief from the one that didn't. "Good," he said. His voice was barely a voice. "Good." Cole hung up and looked at Adrian Blake. Adrian was still against the wall. He had watched the phone call, and he had watched Ryan's face during it, and something in his own expression had shifted in a direction that Madison couldn't entirely map. He looked, she thought, like a man who has played a game to its conclusion and is now sitting with the result in a way that is more complicated than either winning or losing. "So," Cole said. Adrian looked at him. "So, you're in a facility you didn't build with people you didn't bring, and your 12 are down to 6, and Chloe is free." Cole looked at him steadily. "What exactly did you think was going to happen next?" "I thought Ryan was going to be dead," Adrian said. It was the most honest thing he'd said in the room, and he said it the same way. Without drama, without apology, the flat acknowledgement of a fact. "He's not," Cole said. "No, he's not." Adrian looked at Ryan, because his nurse went back for him. He said it without mockery and without irony. He said it with the evaluating quality of a man acknowledging a variable he had failed to account for. He looked at Madison. "I underestimated you," he said. "Most people do," Madison said. A sound from upstairs. More footsteps. Heavier this time, more of them, the percussion of multiple people moving with purpose. Cole's man came back through the interior door and said, fast, "The 6 on the upper floors aren't standing down. They're moving. South stairwell is compromised again. Someone let them into the stairwell from outside." Cole's head came up. "How?" "We don't know. The south external door, it can only be opened from inside." Someone opened it from inside. Cole and Madison looked at each other. "There's a 7th person," Cole said. "Someone we haven't accounted for, in this facility." He looked at the zip-tied men on the floor. "Someone who was already here when Blake came in." The room reconfigured itself in everyone's understanding simultaneously. Adrian Blake's face went through something. Surprise, genuine and complete. The first genuine surprise Madison had seen on it. "That's not mine," he said. "What?" "A 7th person. That's not my operation." He looked at the door. "I had 12 people, no one else. Someone else is in this building, and they're not with me." Cole was already on his phone, and it rang twice, and went to voicemail, and he tried another number, and the same, and his face was doing the thing it did when the arithmetic stopped working, the rapid recalibration of a man whose dataset has changed without warning. Madison looked at Ryan. Ryan's blood pressure was at 85 and falling, and he needed her to be at the monitor and not at the door. And she was at the monitor. She was checking his lines. She was doing the immediate necessary thing, but her mind was on the floor above, and the 6th people who weren't standing down, and the 7th person who shouldn't be there. The door to the room opened. Not the interior stairwell door. The main door. The one from the facility corridor. The one that required the keypad from outside, and that Decker had given Adrian the code for. The door that they had not resecured after Adrian came through it, because there hadn't been time, and now it was opening, and Madison had put the gun down on the counter, and she was 3 steps from the counter, and the door was opening now. The woman who came through it was someone Madison had never seen. 50s, compact, gray uniform, the kind of face that blended into the background of large institutions with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that being seen was a liability. Madison recognized the description before she recognized the face. Short, 50s, gray uniform, the housekeeping woman, the one who had gotten past Decker at the hospital, the one who had swapped the IV bag, the one who had been in the hospital's employment system under a dead woman's identity for 3 weeks. She was here. She was in the facility. And she was not looking at Adrian Blake or at Cole or at Ryan Kingston. She was looking at Madison with the specific focused attention of someone who has located their primary target and is not interested in anything else in the room. In her right hand was a syringe. Madison understood in the half-second before the woman moved that she was not Adrian's asset. She was not Ryan's enemy or Cole's problem or part of the syndicate's internal war. She was something else entirely, a thread that connected to something none of them had seen yet, a layer beneath the layer, and the syringe in her hand was not pointed at the man in the bed. It was pointed at Madison. "You're the one keeping him alive," the woman said. Her voice was accent neutral, the kind of flat, unremarkable American that could come from anywhere. "That's the problem." She moved fast, faster than her age and her compact build suggested. Madison grabbed for the gun on the counter and her fingers hit the edge of it, and it skidded, and she had to look at it for the half-second that cost her the distance. And when she looked back up, the woman was 4 feet away, and the syringe was up, and Madison had no calculation left. Ryan's hand shot out from the bed. He grabbed the IV line stand with the force of a man pulling everything his body had left into a single motion, and he pulled it, and the stand came down between Madison and the woman with a crash of metal and IV bags that was loud enough and sudden enough to make the woman flinch back. And in that flinch, Cole was across the room. Cole took the woman down in 2 seconds. The syringe skittered across the floor. The woman hit the ground with the impact of someone who had not expected the obstacle and had not recovered from the surprise of it in time. And Cole had her wrist and then her other wrist, and she was on the floor, and it was over. And the room was loud with the residual sound of the stand falling, and Ryan's ragged breathing and Madison's heart, which was doing something in her chest that she was going to need a few minutes to address. She picked up the gun. She held it this time. She looked at Ryan Kingston, who had just moved with the force of a post-surgical patient with a chest wound and had gone the color of old chalk doing it, and whose hand was gripping the bed rail with the white-knuckled grip of a man who has spent everything he had and is very much hoping the spending was sufficient. "That was stupid," Madison said. He looked at her. He was breathing in the short, shallow gasps of someone managing genuine pain. His blood pressure alarm had started. "That was very stupid," she said, and she was already at the monitor, already at his side, already doing the 5 things at once that the moment required. And her voice was level and clinical, and beneath it was something she was not going to examine right now. He had thrown the IV stand between her and the syringe, from a post-surgical bed with a chest wound that cost him every breath he took. She addressed the alarm and adjusted his medication and checked the chest tube and made herself do each thing in sequence, rather than all at once, the way she'd been trained, the way it worked. And when she was done, she looked at him and he looked back at her. And neither of them said anything because what there was to say was too large for the moment, and the moment was too busy for it anyway. Cole had the woman on the floor and Adrian Blake against the wall, and 6 people upstairs who were moving through a building that had just become significantly more complicated than anyone in this room had fully understood, and somewhere above them the sound of a door opening, and then another, and then the unmistakable percussion of people who were done waiting. Cole looked at the ceiling. He looked at Ryan. He looked at Madison. "Can he move?" Cole said. Madison looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at her. His blood pressure was at 81/50, and his breathing was shallow, and his chest tube was draining, and his face had the terrible grayish undertone of a body that was deciding again whether it wanted to continue the fight. "He shouldn't," she said. "Can he?" Cole said. She looked at Ryan. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the door. "He can," she said, "if it's the only option." Cole looked at the ceiling again. The sound above them was louder now. Voices, the scrape of equipment, the specific organized noise of people moving with a plan through a space they had mapped. "It's the only option," Cole said. Madison reached up and began disconnecting Ryan Kingston from the monitors with the specific, efficient speed of someone who had made a decision and was not going to revisit it, and Ryan Kingston, who should not have been able to sit up, sat up, and the two of them looked at each other in the noise and the light of the facility that was no longer safe, and Madison thought, "We have come too far to stop here." They went out through the east corridor. Madison had Ryan's left arm across her shoulders, and her right arm around his back, and she could feel the heat coming off him. The fever that had been building since the AFib episode, the body's response to the accumulated insults of the last 36 hours working its way to the surface. He was heavy against her in the way that people are heavy when they are spending everything they have on the act of moving and have nothing left to make it look easier than it is. Each step cost him something she could feel in the tension of his arm across her shoulders, the small, involuntary catches in his breathing when the movement pulled at the chest wound. He did not stop. Cole was ahead of them with the gun, and the woman in the gray uniform, zip-tied, and moving in front of him, and Adrian Blake beside him with the expression of a man who had made a series of calculations and was now living in their results. Behind them, in the facility room, the two disarmed men were secured, and the monitors were off, and the chest tube was clamped, temporarily, a calculated risk, the lesser risk in a room of poor options. And Madison had packed what she could carry in the time she had, which was the medication kit and the antibiotic drip in a portable bag, and the portable pulse oximeter clipped to Ryan's finger and running on battery. 91%. She watched the number as they moved. The east corridor ran 40 feet to a freight elevator that Cole had used for the original equipment delivery and that Adrian's people had not covered because they hadn't known it existed. It was the one card Cole had kept entirely to himself. Not even Decker had known about the freight access, because Cole had arranged it personally, directly, without using any channel that Decker touched. That was the thing about Cole Mercer. He kept cards. The elevator opened when Cole hit the call button and they moved into it. 6 people, one of them barely standing, the space close and smelling of metal and industrial lubricant. And the doors closed and the elevator moved upward with the slow, mechanical patience of something that had not been asked to hurry. Ryan's head dropped slightly. Not unconsciousness, a conservation of effort, the body redirecting resources from the work of holding itself upright to the more essential work of continuing to function. Madison tightened her grip. "Stay with me," she said. "I'm here," he said. His voice was barely sound. "I know, stay with me anyway." He lifted his head, 92% on the oximeter. The elevator opened into the parking structure and Cole went out first and cleared it, and came back and they moved into the structure's flat gray light, and there was a vehicle. A black SUV, not the modified ambulance, something Cole had staged here separately. And Cole had the back door open and Madison was getting Ryan into it with the careful, controlled effort of moving a large injured person into a confined space without aggravating the injury, which was an art form she had practiced and was practicing now. And when he was in and she was in and Cole was in the front, the woman in gray in the back with Cole's man holding her, and Adrian in the passenger seat with the particular compliant stillness of someone who had assessed the situation and decided compliance was the available option, the vehicle moved. Madison sat beside Ryan and watched the oximeter and held his wrist with 2 fingers at the radial pulse. Old habit, the habit that had started all of this. And his pulse was rapid and thready, and she watched it and did the mental arithmetic on his fluid status and his fever and the clamped chest tube and the window they had before the window closed. "Where are we going?" she said to Cole. "St. Gabriel," Cole said. "Back to the hospital." "The hospital isn't... Adrian's network is broken," Cole said. "The people he had in place, the fake housekeeping employee, the badge operation, the records access, all of it traces back to the same source." He glanced at the woman in gray in the rearview mirror. "Her, she's not Adrian's. She never was. Adrian's people were the overt operation. She was something underneath it." "Whose?" Madison said. "That," Cole said, "is what we're going to find out." The woman's name, when it came out, was not a name anyone in the room recognized. She sat in the security office of St. Gabriel Medical Center at 11:40 p.m. Ryan Kingston was 3 floors above them in the surgical suite where Dr. Voss had taken him the moment Cole's vehicle pulled into the ambulance bay, and Madison had walked through the ER doors with a post-surgical patient in deteriorating condition and a look on her face that stopped 3 nurses in their tracks. And she sat in the chair with her wrists still bound, and she looked at Cole Mercer across the table with the expression of someone who has decided that the architecture of the situation has changed enough that silence is no longer the optimal strategy. Cole had asked her once, quietly. She had looked at him. He had asked again, with a quality in his voice that was not loud and not theatrical, and was, for that reason, more effective than either. She said, "Hargrove." Cole went still. "Daniel Hargrove." He wanted Kingston dead, not for the syndicate. The syndicate was Adrian's game. Hargrove wanted Kingston dead because Kingston had documentation. She said it with the flat matter-of-factness of someone delivering a report. 3 years ago, a transaction that Kingston was present for and photographed and kept. Hargrove is a federal contractor. The documentation would end his career and his freedom. Kingston had leverage on Hargrove, Cole said. Kingston had leverage on half of this city, she said. Hargrove decided to act on it before Kingston decided to use it. She looked at her wrists. I was hired 4 months ago. The Adrian Blake operation was concurrent and separate. I didn't know about Blake until I was already embedded in the hospital system. A pause. When Kingston survived the shooting, I improvised. The IV bag, Cole said. The IV bag, the badge, the cardiologist, all improvised. She said it without pride or regret, the tone of a professional assessing her own work. Your nurse was the variable I didn't account for. Cole looked at her for a long moment. You came to the facility to kill her, he said, not Kingston. Kingston dies without her, the woman said. She was the more efficient target. Cole stood up. He did it without drama. He looked at the man posted at the door and said, Get Alvarez, and left the room, and the door closed. Madison found out about Hargrove the way she found out about most things that night, in pieces, from Cole, delivered in the flat factual manner that was his default, when the information was significant enough that ornamentation would be disrespectful to it. She was in the surgical waiting area on the second floor, still in the clothes she'd put on the previous morning, the portable medication bag on the seat beside her, the oximeter in her hand because she hadn't put it down yet and wasn't ready to. The waiting area was empty at midnight except for a night janitor moving through the far end of the corridor and the particular quality of silence that hospitals had in the small hours. Not peaceful, but suspended, everything held between one thing and the next. Cole sat down across from her and told her about Hargrove. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, The documentation Kingston has is real and complete and has been in a location I know about for the last 3 years, Cole said. Ryan built it as a failsafe. 3 copies, 3 separate locations. If anything happened to him, the documentation would go to... He paused. People who would know what to do with it. Federal prosecutors. Among others. Did Hargrove know that? He knows it now. Cole looked at his hands. By morning, the relevant authorities will have everything they need on Hargrove. That's Ryan's standing instruction. The failsafe triggered when he was shot. He looked at her. It was always going to end this way. The documentation was always going to come out. Hargrove made it happen sooner. Madison sat with that. The clean, brutal logic of it. A man spending years preserving evidence of something as insurance, and the insurance triggering the thing it was insuring against. And Adrian? She said. Cole was quiet for a moment. Ryan will decide about Adrian, he said. When he's able. What do you think he'll decide? Cole looked at the window at the end of the corridor. The city outside, dark and indifferent, going about the business of 3 a.m. I think, he said carefully, that 15 years is a long time, and I think Ryan is not a man who does things simply. He paused. I think he'll surprise me. Voss came out at 2:17 a.m. She looked at Madison first, the specific look of a surgeon who has been in a room with someone else's decisions and has come out with opinions. The chest tube was clamped for 40 minutes, she said. I know, Madison said. You know that's... I know what it is. It was the lesser risk. Voss held her gaze for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair beside Madison and set her hands in her lap and said, with the stripped-down precision of someone who has been awake for a long time and has decided that the social padding of her language is not something she can currently afford. He's stable. The wound didn't dehish. The tube is draining cleanly now, and the effusion is manageable. His fever is 389, which we're treating, and his pressure is holding at 98/60, which is the best it's been. She paused. He's asking for you. Madison looked at the surgical suite doors. You should know, Voss said, that Gerald Marsh has been in my office twice tonight. He has questions about the nature of your involvement in this patient's care over the last period of time. I know. I told him the questions would wait until morning. Thank you. I also told him, Voss said, with the expression of someone who has made a decision they are comfortable with, That in my clinical judgment, your involvement in this patient's care has been the single most significant factor in his survival. I told him that in writing. It's in the chart. Madison looked at her. Go see your patient, Voss said. What? Ryan Kingston was awake. He was in the bed. A different room from before, the VIP wing again, but a different room. One that Cole had swept and was currently guarding with people he had verified personally. And he was awake in the specific alert way she had come to understand was his baseline, the mind running ahead of whatever the body was doing. He had a new IV and a clean dressing on the chest wound, and the ventilator was gone, his breathing on its own now with the careful, shallow rhythm of someone who had learned that the breath was something to manage rather than take for granted. He watched her come in. He watched her cross the room and check his monitor and check his IV lines and look at the drainage output from the chest tube and make the small adjustments that the situation required. He watched all of it without speaking, and when she was done and had sat in the chair beside him, a different chair, cushioned, someone had found a cushioned chair, she looked at him and he looked back at her. Boss said you're asking for me, she said. Yes. What do you need? He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone gathering words, but the silence of someone deciding how honest to be with a question that the answer to depends on. I wanted to make sure you were still here, he said. She looked at him. Where would I go? That's what I was trying to determine. He held her gaze. You had the gun. You had the door. At several points tonight, you had the clear option of removing yourself from the situation, and you didn't take it. Removing myself from the situation would have left a post-surgical patient without Madison. She stopped. He said her name the way he'd said it once before. Without decoration, without the clinical distance that most of their exchanges had been conducted across, without the careful management of how much of himself was visible. Just her name, said with the specific directness of a man who has decided that the moment has earned honesty. Why are you still here? He said. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the window. There was a window in this room, the VIP suite's concession to the idea that patients were also human beings, and the window showed the city going through the deep middle of the night, lights in the buildings across the way, the amber wash of streetlights below, the indifferent, ongoing life of a place that had not noticed what had happened inside one of its hospitals over the last 36 hours. I don't know how to answer that in a way that's completely honest, she said. I've been asking myself the same question. Then try incompletely. She thought about it. She thought about 2:48 a.m. and 2 fingers on her wrist and the decision that had not felt like a decision in the moment. The thing that happened before thought, below thought, the reflex of a person who had trained themselves to move toward the emergency rather than away from it. She thought about the chair she'd sat in for 7 hours, and the IV pump alarm, and the defibrillator paddle, and the woman in the gray uniform, and the IV stand coming down between her and the syringe, and Ryan Kingston's arm moving from a post-surgical bed to make it happen. I think, she said slowly, that I've spent 4 years being very good at saving lives, and very careful about not getting too close to the lives I saved, because getting close makes it harder to do the job, and doing the job well felt like it was the most important thing. She looked at him. And then I found your pulse at 3 in the morning, and I made a choice that didn't feel like a choice, and everything after that has been the consequence of that moment. She paused. I'm still here because I haven't found a point where leaving felt like something I was willing to do. He was quiet for a moment. I was awake, he said. When you found it. The pulse. He said it as if he'd been holding the information and had decided this was the moment to put it down. Not fully, but enough. I could hear Hale call the time. I could hear the team stepping back. He looked at the ceiling. And then I felt your fingers. She was very still. I couldn't respond. I couldn't move, but I felt it. He paused. You pressed twice and you waited. And then you moved. You didn't ask anyone. You didn't wait for permission. He turned his head to look at her. I've had people work for me for 15 years who would not have done what you did in that moment. I almost didn't, she said. But you did? Yes. He looked at her with an expression that had nothing managed in it. None of the deliberate opacity she'd seen in the first days. None of the careful layering of someone who had learned that being readable was a vulnerability. He looked at her with the face of a man who is very tired and in significant pain, and has just come through something that has taken the majority of what he had, and who has, in the specific clarity that follows something like that, stopped spending energy on the work of concealment. "I don't trust people," he said. "I trust Cole. I trusted Adrian." He said Adrian's name the way you say a word that has recently changed its meaning. "Outside of that, I've operated under the assumption that everyone has a threshold, a price, something that determines their loyalty." He paused. "I have spent 36 hours trying to determine yours." "Have you?" "I can't find it." "Maybe I don't have one." "Everyone has one." She thought about that. She thought about what her threshold was, what the thing would be that would have made her walk away. The medical license, maybe. The criminal exposure. The gun in her hands that she hadn't known how to hold. The woman with the syringe pointed at her specifically, not at the patient, at her. "I think," she said, "that my threshold involves harm to people who can't protect themselves. And you couldn't protect yourself." She looked at him directly. "That's the whole answer. Everything else is just what happened while that was true." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Adrian asked to speak to me. Voss told Cole. Cole told me." He watched her face. "I'm going to see him." "When you're stronger." "Yes. When I'm stronger." He closed his eyes briefly. He said I didn't remember asking him 3 times about the chair, about partnership. He opened his eyes. "I do remember. I remember each time. I remember what I said each time, which was not no, but which was also not yes. And I understand, looking back at it, that I was giving him an answer I was pretending was not an answer." He said it the way someone says a thing they have been sitting with long enough that saying it is a relief rather than a confession. That doesn't justify what he did. But it's true. She said nothing. He didn't need her to say anything. "The documentation goes to the prosecutors in the morning," he said. "Hargrove will be arrested before the week is out. The woman in gray is already talking. Cole says she'll give them everything." He paused. "The people who came through Adrian's network will be found. That process will take time." He looked at the ceiling. "The syndicate will need to be restructured. There are pieces of it that Adrian built that were built on the assumption of my death. Those pieces will not hold." "That sounds like a significant amount of work," she said. "It is." She thought about what Voss had said, about what Cole had said about threshold, about price, about the window in which leaving had been an option. She thought about the nursing license in Marcia's office and the cushioned chair and the weight of Ryan's arm across her shoulders, moving through the east corridor. "What happens to Adrian?" she said. Ryan was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he might have fallen asleep, and she looked at the monitor and back at his face, and he was awake, looking at the ceiling, looking at something that was not in the room. "He's going to tell me what he knows," Ryan said finally. "About every contact, every arrangement, every person inside the organization he turned or bought or leveraged. He's going to give me everything." A pause. "And then I'm going to decide." "What decides it?" "Whether he tells me the truth." He turned his head to look at her. "Whether he tells me the truth about the 3 times he asked and what I said." "Exactly." He paused. "If his account matches mine, it means he's honest about what drove it. And honesty about what drove it means there's something left to work with." He said it without sentiment and without naivety, the way you say a thing you've thought through completely and have arrived at, not because it's comfortable, but because it's accurate. 15 years is 15 years. She looked at him. She thought about what it cost to hold that. To look at the man who had shot you twice and put assets in a hospital to finish what the shooting hadn't finished, and to hold open the question of what came after. Not to forgive, not yet, maybe not ever, but to hold open the question of whether the 15 years before were real. "That's harder than hating him," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." The room was quiet. The monitor hummed. Outside, the city was beginning the very early process of the next morning. The first gray lightning at the edge of the sky. The change in the quality of the dark that came before anything you could call dawn. "Cole told me you saved the documentation," she said. "The Hargrove files. That there are copies. There are copies in 3 places. He said it was a failsafe. That it was always going to come out." "Yes." "Did you know it would bring all of this?" "I knew it was a risk," he said. "I knew Hargrove would rather have me dead than exposed. I kept the documentation anyway because the alternative was operating under his thumb for the rest of my career, and that was something I wasn't willing to do. He looked at her steadily. Some things are worth the risk. She held his gaze. She thought about 2:48 a.m. and the defibrillator and the chair and the East Corridor and the gun and everything that had been, in its own way, the same kind of calculation. Yes, she said. They are. Chloe Kingston arrived at the hospital at 4:10 a.m. Madison heard her before she saw her, a voice in the corridor outside the room, young and urgent and asking where, asking which room, asking is he okay. In the repeated way that people ask questions when the asking is the only thing they can do while they're still moving toward the answer. The door opened and she was 23 years old and small, and she had Ryan's eyes, the same dark directness, and she came through the door and saw him in the bed, and she stopped. She stood in the doorway for a full second, taking him in, the IVs, the monitor, the dressing at his chest. The overall diminished state of someone who had been through more than the human body was designed to absorb in a short time. Then she crossed the room and she sat on the edge of his bed, and she took his hand in both of hers, and she put her forehead down on his hand, and she didn't say anything. Ryan looked at the top of her head. He raised his other hand, the hand with the IV line, the one that moved slowly and with cost, and set it on the back of her hair with the gentleness of someone who understands that the gesture has to do the work that the words can't. Madison stood at the monitor and did not look at them and gave them the privacy of her averted attention, which was the only privacy available in the room. After a while, Chloe looked up. Her eyes were wet and her face had the specific expression of someone who has been frightened for days and has arrived at relief and found that relief and exhaustion are not as different as she'd expected. She looked at Madison. "You're the nurse," she said. "I'm a nurse," Madison said. "Madison Brooks." Chloe looked at her with the assessing quality that Madison was starting to understand, a Kingston family trait, the rapid taking in, the evaluating, the quick intelligence behind the eyes that made nothing of politeness but saw clearly. "Ryan told me about you," she said. "Cole told me more." "What did Cole tell you?" Chloe looked at her brother. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the oximeter reading and the IV drip rate with the attention of someone who had either learned the relevance of those numbers quickly or had been doing her own research in the hours since she was found. "He told me that you stayed," she said. "Every time there was a door, you stayed." Madison didn't say anything. "He doesn't let people stay," Chloe said. It was not said as a warning or as an endorsement. It was said as a fact about a person she had known all her life. "He's been alone with it, all of it, for a long time, since our parents," she paused. "Since long before that, probably." She looked at Madison with the eyes that were her brother's eyes. "I don't know what any of this looks like going forward. I don't know what his life looks like from here or what any of it means for the people around him." She stopped. "But I'm glad you were there." Madison looked at Ryan. Ryan was looking at her. "So am I," Madison said. Gerald Marsh came to her office, her locker, technically, which was the closest thing she had to an office, at 8:00 a.m., with the expression of a man who has had a very long night and has received guidance from several directions and has arrived at a position that is different from the one he started with. He sat down in the extra chair and set his hands flat on his knees and said, "I want to discuss your continued role here." "Right," Madison said. "There are regulatory matters that will need to be addressed. The unauthorized procedure at time of death, the nature of your involvement in the patient's off-site care, those things will require formal review." He looked at her steadily. "I want to be clear that the hospital's position is not punitive. The clinical outcomes have been remarkable. Dr. Voss's documentation is thorough and favorable, and there are considerations at the board level that—" He paused. "There have been significant developments overnight with regard to the patient's situation. Federal authorities have been involved. The hospital's cooperation has been noted favorably." "I understand," she said. "What I'm trying to say," Marsh said, with the expression of a man who has found his way through the bureaucratic language to the actual thing, "is that no one is moving to revoke anything. The review will happen. It will be on paper and it will be in the file. But the outcome—" He paused. "I've been doing this for 22 years, And I've never seen a nursing decision that specific and that correct made in that margin of time. That is also on paper. That is also in the file. Madison looked at him. She thought about the license and what she'd been willing to spend it on. She thought about whether she'd make the same choices again. She would. That was the thing. She'd make every one of them again. Thank you, she said. Go home, Marsh said. Come back tomorrow. We'll sort the rest. She went back to see Ryan one more time before she left. He was awake but quieter. The sustained effort of the night was settling into him, and the body was doing what bodies did after prolonged crisis, which was to present the bill for everything that had been deferred. His color was better than it had been at any point in the last 36 hours. His breathing was still careful, but it was his, not the machine's, and that was something. She checked his lines. She looked at the drainage. She stood at the monitor and read his numbers, and the numbers were not perfect, but they were moving in the right direction, and that was enough for now. He watched her. Going home? He said. Marsh's orders. She straightened his IV line where it had kinked slightly. You'll be monitored through the day. Voss is doing rounds at noon. Cole has people on the floor that Marsh has apparently decided he doesn't know about. She looked at him. You need to sleep. I will. She picked up the portable oximeter. She had finally put it down, at some point in the last hour, and someone had set it on the table. And she set it back in the medication kit and zipped the kit closed. Small actions, the kind that meant things were winding down, that the immediate emergency had a different shape now. She picked up her bag. Madison, he said. She turned. He looked at her with the expression he'd had in the early hours of the morning. Nothing managed in it, nothing placed. His face in that state was a different face from the one the world got. She had seen it long enough now that she could read it, and what she read was something she did not have a clinical term for and did not particularly need one. I don't know what the next part of this looks like, he said. My life. He paused. I want you to know that. I'm not going to tell you it looks like something manageable or something safe, because that would be a lie, and you have very good instincts for lies. You'd be surprised, she said. I missed Adrian. We all missed Adrian. He looked at her. I want you to know what it is before you decide anything. I know what it is, she said. I've been inside it for 36 hours. The last 36 hours were the quieter version, I know. She held his gaze. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Then why? Because some things are worth the risk, she said. She used his words and she watched them land, and she watched his face do the thing it did when something reached past the management, the involuntary quality, brief and complete, the thing that was not a smile but was close to it in a way that required knowing where to look. She turned and went to the door. I'll be back tomorrow, she said, not looking back, her hand on the door. Sleep. She walked out of the room and down the corridor past the nurse's station where Gloria was coming on for the day shift, and Gloria looked at her and said nothing but raised her coffee cup slightly in a gesture that meant, I see you, I know what you did, that's all. And Madison raised her hand back and kept walking. The elevator. The lobby. The doors of St. Gabriel Medical Center opening onto a morning that was cold and bright, in the particular way of Chicago mornings that had survived the night. The light sharp-edged and the air carrying the smell of the lake, and the city going about the business of being a city, indifferent and continuous, and completely unaware of what had happened inside one of its buildings over the last 36 hours. Madison stood on the steps and breathed it in. She was still a nurse. Her license was intact, or intact enough, or would be. She had a bag with a medication kit in it and a portable oximeter and the clothes she'd put on yesterday morning, and she had not slept in 29 hours and her back hurt, and her hand still knew what it felt like to hold a gun, and she was standing on the steps of the hospital where she had worked for 4 years, and everything about her life was the same, and nothing about it was. She thought about Ryan Kingston pressing 2 fingers to her wrist. She thought about the IV stand hitting the floor between her and the syringe. She thought about what he'd said. I don't know what the next part of this looks like. And the honesty of it, the specific courage it took to say that instead of something easier, and she thought about what she'd said back and how she'd meant it. Some things were worth the risk. She had spent 4 years being very good at saving lives and very careful about not getting close to the lives she saved. That was a choice she'd made and a life she'd built, and she understood why she'd made it, and she did not think she'd been wrong to make it. But standing on the steps in the cold morning light, with everything that had happened in the last 36 hours, settled into her the way the big things settle. Not resolved, not finished, but present and irrevocable in hers, she thought that the choice had been remade in the space of a night. Not by force and not by accident. By 2 fingers on a wrist at 2:48 a.m., by a pulse too faint for the monitors to catch, by the fact that she'd checked. She picked up her bag and walked down the steps and into the morning, and the city opened around her the way cities do, vast and loud and completely indifferent, and she walked through it toward whatever came next, which was uncertain and complicated and not safe, and which she was, for the first time in a long time, not trying to make into something it wasn't. It was enough to be moving toward it. It was, she thought, more than enough.